Chapter 178. Just by guessing, Emotianji guessed the origin of this saber. Everyone was dumbfounded, admiring his wisdom. Seeing everyone's expression, Wu was very proud. She wrinkled her nose and said, "My second brother is the best." "Little brat." Emotianji laughed. With a clang, a red light flashed and dreaming of a Qingwu saber was unsheathed. The night sky was suddenly filled with a gorgeous scene. The dancing starlight actually reflected the dazzling starlight in the nearby lake. The scene was magnificent and incomparable. "Good saber." Emotianji carefully examined the saber. His eyes flashed. "It even has star iron." Then he saw the words Chuyang carved on it. At this moment, Emotianji's eyes suddenly shrank. He looked at Chuyang with a very different gaze. His expression was dignified, full of probing and cautiousness. He hugged the saber and bowed deeply. "Chuga, many thanks. I, Emotianji, will remember your kindness. I will never forget it." When others saw this saber, they saw it as a treasured saber. But when Emotianji saw this saber, he saw Chuyang's kindness. "Brother Emo is too polite. This saber is just a token of my kindness. Of course it has a deeper meaning. Not everyone is worth my effort." Chuyang said bluntly, "Brother Emo, it's enough. Besides, I got this by accident. Now that I'm giving it to Xiao Wu, it's perfect." Chuyang smiled. "Got it by accident?" Emotianji laughed. "It's really a coincidence. This saber seems to be a gift from the heavens to my little sister." "Yes." Chuyang's eyes flashed and met Emotianji's eyes. Both of them smiled at the same time. Emotianji straightened up and said with a relaxed expression, "With this saber, maybe." He didn't continue, but his eyes were full of gratitude. Emotianji understood that this was Chuyang's preparation for Emo Qingwu's return to the clan. He used a peerless saber that could cut through everything. But such a saber was accompanied by a love that was not inferior to his own. Emotianji had met Chuyang by chance, but Chuyang had saved his younger sister. So, Emotianji clearly felt that this affection was very heavy. Emotianji didn't like owing people anything. But he couldn't not owe Chuyang a favor. He had no choice but to owe him. "Brother Chu, I heard that Butian Pavilion and Golden Horse Riders Department are in constant conflict." Emotianji thought for a while and said, "But right now your Butian Pavilion is too weak. No need." Chuyang didn't wait for him to finish speaking. Chuyang had already interrupted him. He insipidly said, "I will make use of the world's people, and I will also deceive the world's people. But I, Chuyang, will not make use of my own sincerity. You just need to send Xiaowu back safely. As for me," Chuyang took a deep breath and said, "I can't rely on you till the end, right?" Emotianji smiled appreciatively and said, "If that's the case, I will tell Brother Chu a story." He paused for a while and said softly, "Legend has it that 1,000 years ago, there was a sex fiend who ran amok in the world. He was lustful. Who knows how many good girls were ruined by him? Who knows how many good families were destroyed because of him? Everyone hated him to the bone. But this sex fiend's cultivation was very high. He was already at the level of an emperor-level master. Plus, his movement was so fast that even monarch-level masters would have a hard time catching up to him. That day, a young martial master was getting married. But he met this sex fiend. The bride was very beautiful, and the sex fiend saw her. The bride didn't know any martial arts, so she was taken away by the sex fiend. She was taken to a cave, and it seemed like she would lose her virginity. But the bride was very knowledgeable. She saw a fragrant flower on the side of the cave. She said, "If you put that flower on my head and have a good drink with me, I will be your bride today." The sex fiend was very happy. What kind of tricks could a weak girl play? So, he bought some wine and personally put the flower on the bride's head. The bride wasn't good at drinking, so she used tea in place of wine. After drinking, the sex fiend found that he couldn't move at all. He was strangled to death by a weak bride with his own belt. An emperor-level master died in the hands of a weak girl who couldn't even truss a chicken. It became the biggest joke in the world. The sex fiend also knew that flower. It was called 1,000 Miles Incense. But he didn't know that once the 1,000 Miles Incense leaves the ground, the juice of the broken stem will mix with the smell of wine. When it enters the meridians, It will become a special kind of bone-crisp incense. Even a martial saint couldn't escape the fate of going limp. Later, this bone-crisp incense was given a name. It was called Supreme Crisp, which once shocked the entire heavenly layer. It was the best enchanting incense in the heavenly layer. For thousands of years, it was the best enchanting incense in the heavenly layer. This story may be false, but it tells us that no one can be belittled. As long as the method is right, even an ordinary person can kill a supreme martial artist. The key is your wisdom. Can you think of a way? However, there were plenty of ways to do so. Emotianji said, Brother Chu, that's why I've always advocated wisdom and not strength. Chu Yang was silent. The next morning the morning fog was still drifting, and the world was hazy. When Emotianji walked out holding Emo Qingwu's little hand, it seemed that the surroundings were silent. Xiao Wu were leaving. Emotianji sighed and said softly, You're leaving? Emo Qingwu opened her big round eyes and said reluctantly, I haven't told Brother Chu Yang. But if your brother Chu Yang sees you, he will feel bad. Emotianji said gently, Xiao Wu also cries. Xiao Wu doesn't look good when she cries. Brother Chu Yang likes you so much, you definitely don't want him to see you look bad, right? Emo Qingwu's tears were about to flow out, but Jiao Kuei bit her lips tightly and nodded vigorously. Yes, I will let big brother Chu Yang see me crying. Although she said that, her eyes were already red and her voice was choked with sobs. Let's go. Emotianji said slowly, Xiao Wu has to grow up well. When your brother Chu Yang comes to our house we have to treat him well. Emo Qingwu finally couldn't help but cry. Her little body stood stubbornly at the door and looked at Chu Yang's closed door without blinking. Brother Chu Yang, Xiao Wu is leaving. Xiao Wu will miss you. You have to miss me too. Xiao Wu is leaving. Brother Chu Yang, don't cry. Emotianji held his sister's hand and walked out of the door step by step. With every step, Emo Qingwu stopped and turned her head, looking hopefully at Chu Yang's door. Her thin teeth had already bitten deeply into her small red lips, leaving a row of teeth marks. She looked back 3 times with every step. When they finally reached the gate of the courtyard, Emo Qingwu suddenly broke free from Emotianji's hand. She turned around and ran 2 steps back. Then she stopped and looked at the courtyard in a daze. Suddenly, she shouted, Brother Chu Yang, don't forget about me. Brother Chu Yang, you can't not miss me. Brother Chu Yang, you can't tell others stories. Brother Chu Yang, I can't bear to leave you. The room was silent. It was as if Chu Yang had already fallen asleep and couldn't hear anything. Emo Qingwu suddenly squatted on the ground and cried. Emotianji looked at his sister and sighed. Angry, he walked back to hold her hand. Emo Qingwu struggled fiercely and only stared at Chu Yang's door in a daze. Her movements were too big. A small bow on Emo Qingwu's head fell to the ground. Emotianji looked and sighed. He didn't pick it up. After a long time, Emo Qingwu slowly turned around and placed her small hand in her brother's. She turned her head and looked back with longing. She looked around and said in a low voice, Second brother, let's go. Yes. After walking out of the courtyard for a long time, Emo Qingwu finally turned around and suddenly burst into tears. Emotianji's white robe was as white as snow. He quietly turned around and waved his hand at a certain direction in the courtyard. 3 big and 1 small human medicine, under Emo Qingwu's heart-wrenching cries, finally disappeared into the morning fog. Heavenly Armament Pavilion was still silent. Behind the willow tree by the lake, Chu Yang's figure slowly appeared. His body was already completely wet from the night dew. His hair was also sparkling with snow. His face was very sad and his eyes were very empty. He walked over step by step and squatted down. He picked up the bow on Emo Qingwu's head and put it near his nose. He took a deep breath and a trace of loneliness appeared in his eyes. He reached out and gently touched a small piece of dark soil on the ground. This was Qingwu's tear. Chu Yang's heart suddenly became empty. He stood up and looked in the direction of the courtyard door. There seemed to be a voice still calling out. Brother Chu Yang, you can't forget me. Brother Chu Yang, you can't not miss me. Brother Chu Yang, you can't tell other people's stories. Brother Chu Yang, I can't bear to leave you. Chu Yang smiled slightly. Qingwu, when I see you again I wonder what you will be like? Would she become that fluttering red-clothed girl? The Qingwu of my dreams? When you go back this time, you must hold on. You must be strong. Do you know how much happiness and hope you've given me in these past few days? Qing Wu. It won't be long before I kill my way up to the upper three heavens to find you. This morning Gu Dusheng GMO and the others were very unusual. Everyone was quietly hiding in their own rooms. The entire heavenly armament pavilion was as quiet as a ghost town. There was no movement at all. Chu Yang's hair fluttered in the morning breeze. He quietly stood at the courtyard door. Suddenly, a sweet voice echoed in his heart. Brother Chu Yang, can I be your fiancé? Okay. Chu Yang couldn't help but say it. Vaguely, a graceful figure in red appeared in his mind. She looked at him with infatuation. She reached out her hand and gently called out, Chu Yang. Chu Yang, Qing. Chu Yang's heart was in pain again. It was as if his heart was being torn apart and bleeding. He slowly sat down and murmured, Emotianji, don't disappoint my expectations. With Emotianji's style of doing things, Chu Yang knew that he would definitely leave without saying goodbye. Because leaving without saying goodbye would reduce Emo Qingwu's sorrow to the greatest extent. If they were to leave face to face, Emo Qingwu would probably cry her heart out. Moreover, Chu Yang didn't know how he would react if that happened. Emo Tianji quietly left with Emo Qingwu. Chu Yang couldn't help but feel resentful, but he also felt grateful. Chapter 179. It was also on this night that Diwu Qingro dismissed all the servants in the great Zhao Prime Minister's manor. He stood alone in the pavilion, wearing a white linen robe. His hands were clasped behind his back as he looked at the night sky. He did not speak for a long time. The autumn cold was deep, and the autumn wind gently whistled. It was as if they were reluctant to part. Diwu Qingro stood motionless. After a long time, a long sigh was heard in the silent night. Diwu Qingro quietly said, Brother, did you go? The wind whimpered but no words were spoken. Diwu Qingro slowly turned around. Behind him there was a small table. The corners were worn out. It was made of ordinary wood, and it was obviously decades old. On the table, there were dishes and a pot of wine. 4 wine cups were placed in the north, south, east and west directions. Diwu Qingro slowly sat down at the head of the table. He picked up the wine pot and poured himself a cup of wine. He looked at it for a long time and then put it down again. I did not believe that you went. Diwu Qingro murmured. Your identity and the resources you controlled were a huge fortune for both the enemy and me. As long as it was a hero who wanted to conquer the world, he would not easily kill you. That's why I've always believed that you've been imprisoned. Diwu Qingro shook his head and smiled bitterly. He raised his cup and drank without hesitation. As he raised his cup, a drop of water dripped from the corner of his eye and fell into the cup. Diwu Qingro closed his eyes and poured this cup of wine mixed with his own tears and sorrow into his stomach. His pale face flushed red due to the intense alcohol. He still did not open his eyes, but slightly lowered his head and softly said, But I did not expect that the one who contended for hegemony with me in front of me was actually a hero. When he said the word hero, Diwu Qingro's voice was heavy and full of sarcasm. Who is the master of the world? I am the hero in the heavens. I will slaughter millions of people, and the sea of blood will be my soldiers. Diwu Qingro murmured, Second brother. This is a poem I wrote. I remember that you used to write a poem. Millions of corpses have yet to be formed, but I am a scholar clad in yellow sand. With a single glance the word song is unified, and my ambition is the same as yours. Diwu Qingro sighed at that time. You said that the world's hegemony could only be achieved by an ambitious and ruthless person. A generation of ambitious and ruthless people plotted against heroes. The heroes had millions of soldiers under their command. The heavenly palace of 100 battles was reduced to white bones, rolling up the sky and plunging the earth into the king's chest. What you're saying is that heroes can be commanders and generals, but they can't be kings. A king must be an ambitious and ruthless person. An ambitious and ruthless person must be a hero, using schemes from the top and schemes from the bottom. Only then would he be able to fight 100 battles in the heavenly imperial court, and turn the entire world into a painting of the king's heart. When you said those words back then, did you ever think that you would die in the hands of a hero? Diwu Qingro chuckled. His smile was trembling, and his laughter was also trembling. He raised his wine cup and drained it in one gulp. Then he quickly poured himself another cup of wine, and said in a trembling voice, "Second brother, you once said that you would get drunk with your elder brother on the day you succeed, because in your entire life, you have never seen me truly drunk even once. Today, your elder brother will fulfill your wish." He raised his wine cup and saluted to the distant stars in the sky. Then, he turned his hand back and drained it in one gulp. "You always said that my life was too tiring, too hypocritical, and that I could not indulge myself and live happily for the rest of my life. Today, I will let go of everything and drink with you." The wind whispered and the flowers and trees around gently swayed. It was as if the little brother of the past was talking to him about the world and pointing out the world. He was still singing and dancing, still young and frivolous. Diwu Qingro shook his head and chuckled, but tears fell from his eyes. In the dead of the night, this unparalleled hero finally stopped suppressing his true feelings in the face of the silence of the world. "Xiangcha." A soft voice came from behind him. "Buchu, come, have a drink with us two brothers," Buchu said. Diwu Qingro did not turn around. He knew who was here at this time. Except for Han Buchu, anyone who came here at this time would die. Han Buchu slowly walked over, hugging a jar of wine. He smiled and said, "Prime Minister, tonight I am here to drink with you." "Good, good." Diwu Qingro chuckled. "Sit." "Buchu, many years ago, the four of us used this table to drink." Diwu Qingro pointed and said, "At that time you were very careful and controlled your drinking capacity. Every time you drank a cup, you used your fingernail to make a mark on the table. Aha, look, there is still your mark here." "Prime Minister." Han Buchu's heart was moved. He looked down at the mark he made that day and could not help but feel warm. Prime Minister still has this table. The world of mortals is like a dream. Even if you wake up from a dream, you still have to leave a mark. Diwu Qingro said softly, "Do you remember? Number 1 was right across from you and Yunhe." "Correct. At that time you drank 8 cups but you made a mark." Diwu Qingro chuckled as if he had returned to that day. "Because of this, number 1 said that you were cheating." Haha. Han Buchu also laughed. His eyes gazed into the void as he reminisced. In a flash, more than 10 years have passed. The two were silent as they drank a few cups. Han Buchu clearly had something on his mind, but he did not dare to say it in front of Diwu Qingro. He could only accompany Diwu Qingro as they drank cup after cup. Time passed. "Speak." Diwu Qingro lowered his head slightly and looked at Han Buchu. "First, Prime Minister, this time, did King-level leader Kong's actions disrupt your plans?" Han Buchu asked carefully. "Kong Shang Xian was reckless, but it was also my mistake. I should not have let Kong Shang Xian go." Diwu Qingro sighed deeply. "I considered his temper, his personality, his interests, and his position before sending Kong Shang Xian. However, I neglected the most important point, human nature." "Human nature?" "Yes, human nature." Diwu Qingro sighed. "Humans are not plants. How can they be emotionless?" That year, Kong Shang Xian was chased down in lower 3 heavens and did not have any place to hide. He was riddled with scars and almost died when he came to lower 3 heavens. He was saved by brother Yin Wu Fa. Although he is usually steady, there is a kind of hot-blooded Jianghu spirit in his heart that is willing to die for his friends. Seeing Yin Wu Fa's miserable state, how could he remain indifferent? Human nature is a very strange thing. Under certain circumstances, a coward can become an indomitable warrior. A peerless hero can also become a coward. At a critical moment, a reckless man can calculate everything. A wise man can also lose his mind. Even a 3-year-old child could not compare to him. I only considered these things, but I missed the most important point. Diwu Qingro laughed and said, "It was my thinking that was wrong. These years I have been in high positions and high positions. I have become accustomed to thinking about things in terms of benefits and gains. This was my negligence. It was not Kong Shang Xian's mistake. This time I did not use the right people. This was my biggest mistake." Diwu Qingro raised his wine cup and said softly, "In the future, I will need to be more careful in this regard. Reflect on yourself 3 times. Prime Minister is truly a brave man." Han Buchu said. These words were not purely flattery. How many people like Diwu Qingro, who had a high position in history, could analyze themselves in such a profound manner and admit their mistakes in front of their subordinates? Diwu Qingro's mind was worthy of his position, and he was completely calm. This kind of Diwu Qingro was the most frightening. Plus, Kongshang Xian's actions proved one thing. Diwu Qingro said in a low voice, that is, number 1 is dead. Saying this, Diwu Qingro's eyes flashed with a bone-piercing pain. This pain caused him to close his eyes tightly. His heart throbbed with pain. Han Buchu was silent. Everyone was smart. There was no need to explain anything. Then, King-level leader Kong and Yun He sent back information. Han Buchu wanted to say something but stopped. Diwu Qingro waved his hand and interrupted him. Diwu Qingro looked at his wine cup and said calmly, let's talk about King of Hell Chu. Han Buchu took a deep breath and said, this person is really hard to say. Then let me say it. Diwu Qingro smiled. Buchu, this King of Hell Chu, from his actions, you can see that he is a once-in-a-millennium genius. He has your careful calculations, Yun He's calmness, and Gao Shang's guts. Vaguely, he also has a little bit of a flawless plan. Han Buchu listened quietly. His favorite thing was to quietly listen to Diwu Qingro analyze a person, from their strengths and weaknesses to how to break through. In Han Buchu's eyes, this was a pleasure. King of Hell Chu first entered Du Shiqing's army and entered Iron Cloud Chung. Then, using Heavenly Armament Pavilion as a jumping point, he entered Butian Pavilion in one fell swoop. From this point of view, even though King of Hell Chu is young, he is very careful. Every step has a clear goal. Every step is to attack other people's weak spots. Diwu Qingro obviously did not believe the rumor that King of Hell Chu was a king-level master. Let's talk about his first step first. Du Shiqing was taken advantage of by Chu Yang. This was because Du Shiqing had saved countless people and could not remember how many people he had saved. In this world, most people are ungrateful. Even though Du Shiqing was a doctor, he could not help but feel resentful. Now that he met someone who came to repay his kindness, Du Shiqing's heart was very happy and satisfied. This was easy to imagine. Plus, at that time, Du Shiqing did not go to Iron Cloud willingly. It was his weakest moment. Therefore, when Chu Yang said that he wanted to repay his kindness, the first step of his plan was a perfect success. In this first step, Chu Yang used human nature. Diwu Qingro said deeply. Han Buchu gently nodded. In the second step, when Du Shiqing entered Iron Cloud, anyone with a discerning eye could see that it was my plan. Therefore, Iron Cloud's military sent people to kill Du Shiqing. Chu Yang completely resolved it, and did not reveal the other party's identity. This is very important. You may think that this is just a normal thing, but you have overlooked the deeper meaning. Chapter 180. He left some leeway. You have to pay attention to the fact that he allowed the captured general to clash with Du Shiqing's men. But no matter what, he always protected him. This way, all the favors are on Chu Yang's shoulders. In the end, the general escaped. But Chu Yang had also left behind an excellent foreshadowing for the military. If King of Hell Chu wants to use troops in the future, his first choice would be this troop. You have to know that this general is one of the top 10 generals of the continent, Wu Kuangyun. You have to pay special attention to this point. Send people to collect information about Wu Kuangyun's military habits. Travel day and night and carefully analyze them. If there comes a day when the two armies face each other, and his military habits change drastically, then mobilize the army and annihilate him at all costs. Because at that time it will be King of Hell Chu leading the troops. Yes. Han Buchu wiped his sweat. Then enter the city. The third step is to establish Heavenly Armament Pavilion. Tai Longcheng actually went there personally. Why? Is it really because of the two words Heavenly Armament? Diwu Qingro's eyes were deep. Tai Longcheng went because Chu Yang left some leeway for the people who tried to kill Du Shiqing. Tai Longcheng wanted to see the person who could single-handedly defeat Wu Kuangyun. That's all. After that, the fourth step is to enter Butian Pavilion. Even though I don't know what happened, Tai Longcheng and Du Shiqing's contributions cannot go unnoticed. Tai Longcheng cherished talent, but he was also returning the favor. Because if the robbery incident were to be exposed, with Tai Butian's temper, Ironclad would definitely lose a general. And Du Shiqing, because of his appreciation, would have spared no effort to speak good words for Chu Yang in front of Tai Butian. These are Chu Yang's first 4 steps. 4 steps to reach the heavens and play with human nature. Di Wuqing Ro said deeply, so far, King of Helchu's first goal has come to an end. So his second goal is Butian Pavilion? No. His second goal is to clean up the place, Li Yao said. Di Wuqing Ro said. He first used a thunderous method to dig out all the spies we planted in Butian Pavilion. His way of thinking relied on his meticulousness and reverse deduction. Everything had to be pushed forward from the results, and then find those things that most people would agree with and overturn them. Di Wuqing Ro chuckled. This is easy to say, but it is very difficult to do. That's right. When the Golden Horse Riders Department released spies all over the world, they used a method that was approved by the majority of the people. That was the only way to ensure the safety of the spies. King of Helchu's actions have hit their weak point. Han Buchu pondered and said slowly. That's right. That's why after he cleaned up Butian Pavilion, he used the blood of our people to establish his authority. It was also from then on that he began to act mysterious, wearing a black robe and a mask. Rumors began to spread. And these rumors were used to prevent the actions of King-level Master Kong and King-level Master Yin. In other words, this King of Helchu had already seen Ironclad's weakness at that time. Moreover, he was clear-headed enough to make arrangements. Everything was done for the sake of his future high position and power, and at that time you only saw a joke in your calculations. Because we all knew that Chu Yang was King of Helchu. No matter how much he tried to deceive us, it could not be changed. However, all of you have neglected the fact that under certain circumstances, this kind of unreal deception can turn the entire situation upside down. And the 2 king-level masters' actions were misled by these rumors. Buchu, when the 2 king-level masters left, did they really not know King of Helchu's identity? But when it came to it, why would they be suspicious? These are all traps and psychological warfare that King of Helchu has arranged in advance. I'm not afraid of you not being suspicious, but even if you have high intelligence, you will still be full of doubts after entering the trap. Even if you only have a little bit of doubt, King of Helchu can use the resources at hand to turn it into a full-blown doubt. Then, he will overturn his own conclusions. This person's scheming, his grasp of human nature, and his understanding of psychology are truly frightening. Di Wuqing Ro pointed out Chu Yang's arrangements bit by bit. The more he spoke, the more he felt that Chu Yang was a great threat. This was the first time he had seen someone like this. His voice became heavier and heavier. Han Benchu unconsciously straightened his body and listened attentively to Di Wuqing Ro's analysis. At the same time, he also began to reorganize Ironclad's royal court. He started with a few minor officials. After confirming that his methods were correct, he began to act boldly and decisively the next day. He repeatedly waved his butcher's knife, but he did not make a move on number 1. He wanted us to inform number 1, Huyan Aobua is Fengling's little dog. After confirming that we had passed the message, King of Helchu took action and captured number 1 in one fell swoop. Then, he immediately used number 1's identity to set up a trap. These things were all linked together. He even accurately calculated number 1's self-confidence and wishful thinking, as well as our reaction. Di Wuqing Ro sighed deeply. If it were not for the conclusive information, even I would have suspected that the enemy thousands of miles away was a 17 or 18-year-old boy or a 100-year-old fox. Such precise control, such careful planning. Yes, even though we knew something had happened to number 1, we believed that number 1 would not say anything. Plus, King of Helchu did not make a move on number 1's network. This confirmed our suspicions. Therefore, no matter what, we would have fallen into this trap. Han Buchu also sighed. Even if King of Helchu did not know the relationship between number 1 and the Prime Minister, the arrangements he made were enough. Then, after he took control of number 1, he felt that he was stretched thin. This was because his strength was not enough to deal with our follow-up Ji Gu. This matter was originally King of Helchu taking a risk. With his appetite, he would not be able to eat a big fish like Yin Wu Fa. But at this time it just so happened that a great family from the upper 3 heavens arrived. This allowed King of Helchu to come back from death's door. He spared no effort in using this family to frame us again and again. Using a super family that was completely in the dark, without using his own strength, he was able to seriously injure 2 of our king-level leaders. And now, King of Helchu's second plan has been completed. His second step stratagem genesis is the real deal. Jie Qingro sighed deeply. Next, he will use all of his strength to surround and chop down king-level leaders Kong and Yin. I hope you and he can hold on. Xian. Han Buchu did not understand. Yes, Golden Horse Riders Department has 4 king-level leaders. Now 2 of them are crippled. The remaining 2 need to maintain the entire Golden Horse Riders Department. They absolutely cannot go out. This way, King of Helchu can use this time to develop Butian Pavilion and build Iron Cloud. Everything that King of Helchu has done is for the sake of this period of time. Diwu Qingro sighed. The reason he wants to buy time is because at most in 3 months, Tai Shicheng will not be able to hold on. At that time, Iron Cloud Nation will be in chaos. At this time, King of Helchu will continuously attack Golden Horse Riders Department. By the time Tai Shicheng dies, we will no longer be able to organize our strongest assassins and assassins to sabotage or do anything else. Even if our strength is weakened at that time, it will still be a great thing for Iron Cloud Nation. Not to mention such a great loss. Diwu Qingro said coldly, even though I do not want to admit it, I have to admit that King of Helchu has already won this time. Han Buchu was shocked. He had already placed King of Helchu in a very high position, but he still underestimated him. King of Helchu had been preparing for the next step by step. He had been advancing step by step. And he had been advancing step by step. And he had been preparing for the next step. He had been advancing step by step. And he had been making subtle changes in the entire situation. However, this is not enough. It is far from enough to shake the foundation of Golden Horse Riders Department. Therefore, King of Helchu will definitely have a backup plan. Diwu Qingro thought hard and said, the next step, King of Helchu's hand should be able to reach into Great Zhao. Before he makes a move, there is no way to predict what he will do. Prime Minister, does this King of Helchu not have any weaknesses? Han Buchu asked. Weaknesses? Although King of Helchu's intelligence is not bad, he has many weaknesses. Diwu Qingro said. His weakness is that he likes to surprise people. This kind of character loves to take risks. This kind of person will rise very quickly, but once he is defeated, he will be consigned to eternal damnation. There are only 2 kinds of consequences for a surprise attack. One is a complete victory, and the other is total annihilation. Diwu Qingro said slowly, to deal with this kind of person you need to be patient. You only need to seize one opportunity, and that is enough. Also, although King of Helchu is called King of Hell, he is not a ruthless person who will do anything to achieve his goals. On the contrary, Tai Butian is a hero, and this King of Helchu is also a hero. If not, then King of Helchu's position under Tai Butian will certainly conflict. A hero can be under a ruthless person, but a ruthless person will not be willing to be under a hero. The so-called hero is a laughable title. Most of the so-called heroes value friendship. Diwu Qingro said slowly, a ruthless person is afraid of losing power, and a hero is afraid of being hurt. In the future, to deal with Tai Butian and King of Helchu, you must strike on the 2 words friendship. This kind of person will certainly be defeated if his heart is hurt. I only need 1 chance. That's enough. Han Buchu muttered to himself. I'll start with the feelings. He was sensitive enough to feel something and thought hard. After Diwu Qingro's analysis, Han Buchu finally realized how terrifying King of Helchu was. So many ordinary people would think that these things were ordinary or even meaningless. But King of Helchu had been preparing for a rainy day since a long time ago. Chapter 181. Diwu Qingro no longer spoke. He poured another cup of wine and slowly drank it. The crescent moon in the sky slowly moved to the west. The shadows of the trees in the pavilion also slowly moved. I will personally write a letter to Tai Butian to bring back number 1's family. Diwu Qingro drank 5 cups of wine and suddenly said quietly, this, Tai Butian may not agree? Han Buchu was shocked. Diwu Qingro personally writing a letter was a sign of his attitude. He was also delivering himself into Tai Butian's hands and giving him a chance to humiliate him. Wouldn't this damage his prestige? Tai Butian will agree, Di Wuqingro said casually. Order Dong Wufa to attack at the fastest speed in the shortest amount of time. No matter the cost, take 2 of Iron Cloud's cities. Open the gates of Iron Cloud. I will tell Tai Butian that if he returns his family, Great Zhao will withdraw from these 2 cities. Han Buchu was shocked, but he did not dare to say anything. This was clearly a rash decision made by Di Wuqingro in a fit of rage. From this, it could be seen that number 1's death had a huge impact on him. This will be the last time in my life that I, Di Wuqingro, will act on impulse. Di Wuqingro looked up at the sky and said quietly, and number 1 is worth it. Han Buchu finally understood. In Di Wuqingro's life, the person he cared about the most was number 1. In other words, only number 1 could make Di Wuqingro lose control of his emotions. But number 1 was already dead. Therefore, Di Wuqingro used this decisive method to bid farewell to his former self. In one war, no matter how many people died or who died, in Di Wuqingro's heart, these people would be buried with his brothers. They would also be buried with Di Wuqingro for the past 10 years. From now on, Di Wuqingro would have no weaknesses. This impulse seemed to be a slight, but in reality it was also a deterrent. Plus, Han Buchu believed that Di Wuqingro definitely had a backup plan. Yunhe staying in Iron Cloud Citadel is not a long-term plan. If the 2 king-level masters are found before they recover from their injuries, the consequences will be unimaginable. Di Wuqingro's eyes were already showing traces of drunkenness. But his mind was still very clear. He resolutely said, "A big battle will be my warning. This letter is my sincerity. When the time comes, Yunhe will openly escort number 1's family back to their country. Whoever dares to stop him will be destroyed." Han Buchu was drenched in cold sweat. Are number 1's family members real? Han Buchu could not understand why a person like number 1 would do something so stupid. Before number 1 went, he had already cut off all means of retreat. A trace of sadness appeared in Di Wuqingro's eyes. I will raise his descendants well. Han Buchu remained silent. No one would have thought of this, not even Chu Yang. Tang Xianshang's wife and children in Iron Cloud were actually his first wife. His children. This person was truly a lunatic. Iron Cloud Citadel had turned into a boiling pot of porridge. Everywhere there was a hubbub like a market. It had to be said that the power of the masses was boundless, and the wisdom of the masses was also boundless. After Chu Yang gave the order, the 3 triad bosses gathered together to discuss. They came up with an extremely reliable plan. Iron Cloud Citadel would be divided into 5 areas: north, south, east, west, and west. Then they would take care of their own duties. They would herd all the outsiders into a large open space. Then official Chang'an would cooperate with the various government offices in the capital to investigate. After the investigation, they would gather all the people together. Those who were suspicious would be taken away. As a result, chaos broke out in the city. However, many spies were caught. Some of the spies who were mentally weak started rioting and were captured. These people were not strong and were afraid of death. Naturally, they did not keep their mouths shut. They began to follow the vines to find the melons. One by one they began to catch them. In this process they actually caught a silver horse rider. This was truly a cult. Iron Cloud Citadel's garrison troops, security forces, and Royal City's guards were all involved in this operation. In 2 days and 1 night, the search area had shrunk by half. Now it was already midnight, but they were still working overtime. Especially the 10,000 hoodlums. They were yelling as if they had taken an aphrodisiac. They were full of vigor. Even Chang'ang's eyes were red from working so hard. The 3 triad bosses are still in high spirits. The situation is becoming more and more serious. If this continues, I am afraid that in less than a day, they will find us here. Chang Yuanhe frowned in his temporary hiding place and thought hard for a solution. Because of the jade spirit ginseng, Yin Wufa had recovered 30% of his martial strength. Kong Shang Xian's martial strength had also recovered less than 30%. Facing this situation, the 2 of them were at their wits' end. If it was only the 2 of them, then it would be much easier. However, the problem was that there were 50 people. Under this kind of search they were too big of a target, The only thing we can do now is to split up again. Cheng Yun, he said. Everyone will split up again to avoid being surrounded. Even if we are caught, it will be because there are not enough people. Plus, there is not enough evidence. There will be a day when we will be released. That won't do. If we split up like that, won't we be like lambs waiting to be slaughtered? Yin Wufa said, in my opinion, it would be better to break out of the encirclement tonight. Break out. Cheng Yun, he coldly said. 200,000 soldiers are chasing us. This is Iron Cloud's capital, the center of Iron Cloud Nation. You want to force your way back to Great Zhao? We will do as official Cheng says. Kong Shang Xen said sullenly. Breaking out of the encirclement is absolutely impossible. Even a level 1 Emperor-level master would die of exhaustion in front of 200,000 soldiers. Not to mention us. Cheng Yun, he frowned and said, I'm easy to deal with. I'm a scholar and have no martial arts, so they won't suspect me. But the others, they are definitely the main suspects. If one of them loses his cool, then everything will be over. Especially you two, your appearances are too obvious. Plus, you have such a heavy injury. Once you are discovered, the situation will not be good. Cheng Yun, he said. If the two king-level masters do not mind, how about we hide in the leader's cellar? Kong Shang Xian and Yin Wufa rolled their eyes at the same time. Cheng Yun's words were meant for the two of them to hear. It was only because of their status that these two people were the most likely to be unable to keep their composure. The two of them were king-level masters. How honorable were they? How could they hide in a cellar like rats? That was why he prepared ahead of time. We are only temporarily hiding from the wind. Cheng Yun, he said. That's good. Kong Shang Xian frowned. Sigh. We have been surrounded in upper 3 heavens for 7 or 8 years. We are used to it. Me too. In the past, to avoid assassination, I had to hide in a cesspool. Yin Wufa said angrily. Cheng Yun, he finally let out a sigh of relief. The place where they were hiding was the most important place for Tai Yun Chang. It was not far from the royal palace. This was the so-called darkness under the lamp. Also, I have already thought of a way to let Gao Weicheng influence Du Shiqing and create chaos. However, this is a bit risky. Gao Weicheng might. But we can't do anything about it. Cheng Yun, he frowned as if he was talking to himself. Then he stopped talking. Break up and evacuate immediately. If you can send a message, then do it once a day. If you can't, then don't force it. Safety first. Following Cheng Yun's order, the less than 10 people left behind to protect Yin Wufa and Kong Shang Xian. The rest of the people immediately scattered. These people were all experts. If they acted alone, it would be easy for them to escape from the encirclement of ordinary soldiers. It had to be said that with Cheng Yun's arrangement, as long as there were no accidents, the two king-level masters would not be discovered. They would be able to escape the search of Iron Cloud Citadel. Even if there were losses, they would only lose a few people. The majority of their strength would still be intact. Yu Yun was a martial artist in his 20s. He had wanted to join Butian Pavilion for a long time. However, his cultivation was too low, and he was eliminated at the first checkpoint. In a depressed mood, he did not participate in this search. Instead, he drank until he was drunk. Then, without knowing what time it was, he walked out of the tavern. He only felt that he was drunk and did not care where he was. He found a soft place and lay down, snoring loudly. While sleeping soundly, he was suddenly woken up by the urge to pee. He lay there in a daze. With his eyes closed, he took out his weapon and began to pee. After half of his stock was gone, he felt a bit more awake. He opened his eyes and saw that he had fallen asleep on a small pile of firewood. Looking here, it seemed to be firewood left in front of someone's house. After the alcohol subsided, he felt the autumn wind was cold and shivered. He peed on his pants and could not help but curse. He used his fingers to stop the pee and was about to stand up to continue. Suddenly his vision blurred and with a sound, a shadow flashed over his head and the three of them were sent flying. Then, as if a flock of crows had been startled, one by one, the black-clothed people flew out of the courtyard he was leaning on. Yu Yun's entire body froze. He opened his mouth and was about to scream, but he quickly recovered and covered his mouth. However, he forgot that he had to stop himself from peeing. As soon as he removed his hand, He began to pee again. He did not waste a single bit of his pee and peed on his pants. He did not even realize it. The hidden boat also heard the last two people whispering, "The king-level leader is here." No silence. The other person hastily shouted. Then he flew away from the top of his head. Yu Yun's hair stood on end. He immediately thought of the city's manhunt these past few days. Could it be these people? Listening to their words, it seems like there are people here. Yu Yun's eyes suddenly flashed. He stood up quietly. The firewood behind him rustled. He quickly pinched his nose and meowed like a cat. Then he sneakily left. Chapter 182. Ever since Mo Qingwu left, Minister Chu devoted himself to his work and cultivation. Now was a crucial time, so he decided to stay at Butian Pavilion. During this period of time, GMO was bored out of his mind. Among the 5 people in Heavenly Armament Pavilion, Dong Wushang was his enemy, Rui Butong and Gu Duxing were his best friends, and Luo Kedi was the one who was being bullied. Therefore, Luo Kedi kept pestering GMO and insisted on forming an alliance. However, GMO was not Gu Duxing's opponent. He helped Luo Kedi fight twice and was beaten black and blue by Gu Duxing. Then he was pestered by Luo Kedi, so he decided to follow Chu Yang to Butian Pavilion to gain experience. GMO thought, motherfucker, I can't afford to offend him, but can't I hide? Heaven Mending Pavilion was brightly lit. Martial revered and martial great masters came and went in a hurry. The martial masters and martial artists all became errand boys. Every one of them increased their speed and did not stop for even half a second. Suddenly there was a commotion at the door. Chang'ang, who had just returned and was about to go out, angrily said, "What happened?" "There is a guy who said he found the whereabouts of the spies." The guard at the door stammered. He didn't believe that this unkempt man would know the whereabouts of the people of the Golden Horse Riders Department. Moreover, this guy had shamelessly boasted that he wanted to see Minister Chu. He had been scolding him in a bad mood. But this guy swore to the heavens that he was Minister Chu. He was so angry that he wanted to kick him. But Great Hall Master Chang had arrived at this critical moment. "Let him in," Chang'ang said angrily. "Why didn't you bring him in when you found a clue? What are you doing?" The guard withdrew his mouth and waved his hand. Another guard carried in a completely drenched fellow. Chang'ang suddenly smelled urine. He pinched his nose and said angrily, "What is going on? This little guy is peeing." The guard pinched his nose. He wanted to laugh but did not dare to. "Motherfucker. He is so young and he can't do it?" Chang'ang looked at him and said irritably, "Throw him out. Motherfucker. Hold on, let him talk. It won't waste much of the University of Technology's resources." A cold voice sounded. It was King of Hell Chu who was wearing a mask. Since yesterday, the people of Butian Pavilion could clearly feel that the minister's aura was a lot colder than it had been a while ago. His authority was even greater. You are Minister Chu. Official Chu? Yu Yun anxiously shouted, "I really have a secret." Chu Yang listened patiently. Then, his eyes lit up as he asked, "Are you sure that you're not drunk? I'm an orphan and have nothing to vouch for." "I'll vouch for it with the lives of my wife and mother-in-law. I'm absolutely not seeing things." Yu Yun was anxious. He raised his hand and swore to the heavens. His saliva splattered everywhere. "If I'm lying, may the heavens protect my wife from running away with someone else. Can we still find that place?" Chu Yang's eyes flashed. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this guy. He really knows how to swear. It's an easy place to find. It seems to be the mansion of one of the officials who was executed not long ago. Yu Yun was overjoyed. He knew that since the other party asked, he must want to go and take a look. "Oh." Chu Yang and Chang'ang looked at each other and saw the regret in each other's eyes. The mansions of these officials had just been confiscated and had not been sealed yet. Additionally, so many people had just died in those mansions. Therefore, they were afraid of selling them. Therefore, they couldn't sell them. Now they were the most secret of places. "Gather all the men. We'll go now." Minister Chu made a prompt decision. "All martial masters and above, go. Also, inform the guards of the capital to seal off the direction of the inner city. Tell them that not even a bug can get out of here. If anyone tries to break out, no matter who they are, Kill them without mercy. Wait for them to complete the encirclement. Experts, move out immediately. Don't alert the enemy. Send people to the capital and borrow some experts. Move out immediately. Immediately, the entire Butian pavilion exploded into chaos. More than 200 people immediately stood in front of King of Hell Chu. Chu Yang really did not expect that the hiding place of a king-level master would be discovered by such a wretched person. But now, he did not have the time to sigh. He would rather believe it than not. As for the shock, well, it was actually unnecessary worry. Now that the enemy was in chaos, the enemy could not be more alarmed. Even if they were alarmed, that was it. Moreover, Chu Yang felt that this information was definitely not fake. Not long after, a firework rocket shot into the sky from the center of the city and exploded. Chu Yang looked at the fireworks in the sky. His eyes turned cold. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go." This firework proved that the area had been firmly surrounded like an iron spike. "Boss Chu, I will go too." GMO jumped out. "You?" Chu Yang was a bit hesitant. If GMO went, it would be fine if nothing happened. If something happened, the G clan's anger would not be a joke. "Don't worry." GMO smiled and winked. "I will give you a small nursery. Good. Let's go." After half an hour, Chu Yang's group arrived in front of the gate. They hid in the distance and asked, "Are you sure this is the place?" Yu Yun's face was pale. He was so nervous that he was breathing rapidly. He spat, "I swear to the heavens. This is the place." Then he begged, "Minister, if we really catch the spy, can you let me join Butian Pavilion?" "What is your name?" Chu Yang asked. Chu Yang had already changed his ferocious mask to a veil. If he still wore a mask, it would be tantamount to giving the enemy a target. I am called Yu Sun." Yu Yun used his fingers to pull at his pants. The weather was cold now. Peeing on his body was really too uncomfortable. "Yun, your luck is really good." Chu Yang almost laughed. This guy was really lucky. His pee actually splashed 2 king-level masters. He said, "If today's operation is successful, you can go to Heavenly Secret Hall and report to Hall Leader Chan." "Thank you, Minister." Yu Yun knelt down excitedly and kowtowed. I hope you can always be so lucky. That is also Butian Pavilion's luck." Chu Yang smiled. On the side, Chang'ong whispered, "Minister, is it okay? Wait a little longer." Chu Yang looked at the gate from 300 feet away. He was also very nervous. Tai Butian's reinforcements had not arrived yet. Chu Yang was a little impatient. If they were discovered by the enemy, they would lose the initiative. Chu Yang was a little puzzled. Tai Butian could not have dropped the ball at this time. What was going on? After waiting a little longer, Chu Yang finally gritted his teeth and said, "How many layers of archers are there now?" 3 layers of cover. They are all made of iron, and their arrows are made of pure steel. Add more layers of cover in all directions. Chu Yang said fiercely, "Increase the cover in the air to 18 layers. We can't let any of them escape." "Yes. Once the setup is complete, immediately begin the operation." "Yes." Silently, the 3,000 archers in the army were redeployed, adding another layer of insurance on top of the 1,000 archers they already had. "I still feel that something is not right, boss. Are you sure that there are enemies here just based on this little one's words?" GMO did not understand and said, "Aren't you a little gullible?" "Intuition." Chu Yang said casually, "In all of Ironcloud Citadel, there are very few places that have not been searched. Only this place could hide so many people at once without being discovered. I still feel a little uncertain. I will go and take a look." Jimo's voice had just fallen when he jumped out from his hiding place. Chu Yang could not stop him and he was already 50 feet away. Under the night sky, Jimo's body seemed to turn into a phantom. He floated over 100 feet and then stopped for a moment. Leaving behind a series of afterimages, he was already in front of the gate. GMO was not suspicious. He just wanted to show off his skills in front of Chu Yang. During this time he was unbearably idle. Plus he felt that he had improved a lot. Plus he was still young. In the next moment he was about to jump over the wall. At this moment the gate suddenly opened with a creak. A man in black suddenly appeared in front of GMO. In a split second the two looked at each other and were both stunned. Chu Yang, who was 30 feet away, immediately cursed in his heart. Who is it? The man in black took a step back and asked cautiously. Ada-e? Ditchintent mud? Tired of doggy mud? GMO was tongue-tied. This was absolutely unexpected. Who would have thought that just as he was about to jump over the wall, this guy would open the door and come out? He suddenly had an idea and opened his mouth to say something strange. What? The black-clothed man was at a loss. Ada-e guwu? Tired of tears? Ruffian guwu? Enemy martial arts? Jimo's eyes rolled around. His tongue rolled around in his mouth. Enemy Wuxia? The man in black blinked pitifully. He only understood the last two words. Enemy martial arts. Enemy martial arts. GMO nodded repeatedly. Please vomit? Ada-e? Ditchintent mud? Enemy martial arts? Please vomit? Enemy martial arts? Diwu Qingro? The man in black looked at this alien in distress. He was so anxious that his face was sweating. Who are you? Honey 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 honey? Lulu de-e? Tired of doggy mud? Jimo's face was very anxious. He kept making threatening gestures. What do you mean by tired of talking? The pitiful man in black was unexpectedly led into a ditch. His tone of voice also unknowingly changed. Dog ant. Dog ant. GMO was very angry. He turned around and left. He muttered, Dog ant sadi dog ant ditch intent mud. Humph. The man in black stood there in a daze. He thought about the meaning of these strange words. Suddenly he woke up and shouted, Pig Slayer. Stop. Poor guy. GMO made him unable to speak. Chapter 183. The man in black immediately knew that he was about to be killed. He roared and chased after Chuyang. Chuyang held back his laughter and gave the order, kill. Xiao xiao xiao. The sound of something breaking through the air was heard. The man in black who had just jumped up suddenly turned into a hedgehog in midair. From all directions and above, there were at least hundreds of iron arrows that pierced into his body at the same time. A firework shot into the sky. From all directions there was a loud roar, kill. The entire night sky seemed to tremble violently. Hundreds of people leaped into the air at the same time from all directions, rushing towards the house. Behind them there was a dense army that was slowly moving forward. Everywhere they went, there was no obstruction. The walls and the houses were all knocked down. In the blink of an eye, the house had become an isolated island. All around there were soldiers with unsheathed swords and nocked arrows. They were all motionless. Inside the house there was the sound of killing. The sound of swords and spears colliding was heard. Then with a loud boom, the four walls of the house were all knocked down. Like a forest, they were invincible. The operation this time was truly thunderous. Not long after Kongshang Xian and Yin Wu Fa hid in the secret room, only a few people were left on guard. Then they suddenly heard an earth-shattering sound. Countless soldiers rushed into the house. They were exposed. Why were they exposed? It could be said that everyone had been hiding here for 3 times before finally choosing such a foolproof place. How could it be discovered so quickly? The 2 king-level leaders were shocked. This was the first time in their lives that they were panicking. Right now, most of the people were scattered. This was the time when they were at their weakest. How could the enemy just happen to attack at this time? Then there was the sound of fierce fighting. The 5 martial great masters and 3 revered martial artists outside were already fighting with the enemy. Kongshang Xian was pacing back and forth in the secret room, full of worry. Next to him, Yin Wu Fa, who had just regained some color, was also there. The 2 of them paid close attention to the movements outside. Neither of them said a word. They had a vague feeling that something bad was about to happen this time. Don't worry, Your Highness, he said. After Lord Wang's estate was raided, I secretly began to make preparations. I didn't touch anything in the mansion at all. I dug it up from the ground and sealed it. This secret chamber was located 30 feet underground, and its location was extremely well hidden. There was no entrance at all. Even if King of Hell Chu has the ability to reach the heavens, he won't be able to find us here. The commander of the Iron Horse Riders said respectfully. He was the one who developed this place. Even Chang Yun and Kuei, he praised him for his ingenuity in this operation. I hope so. Kongshang Xian heard the sounds of fighting above and sighed. I'm afraid the 8 brothers above are finished. To die for the throne I have no regrets, the Iron Horse cavalry commander said solemnly. Once the courtyard was pushed down, the 8 people inside were like exploding grenades, flying out from 8 different directions to break out of the siege. However, the dense rain of arrows that fell from the sky made them suffer. They thought that it was only a small search party. Who would have thought that there were tens of thousands of soldiers lying in ambush outside? They directly sealed off the entire area. After one round of arrow rain, 3 people were injured. Then the ironclad experts lying in ambush swarmed up and fought. Chu Yang's black robe fluttered in the wind as he stood on a branch of a big tree. He looked at the turbulent fighting inside and couldn't tell the difference between the enemy and his own people. He could only see that there was a crazy battle going on inside. It was like a tide rushing out, spreading out, and then being pushed back by the outside. There were a total of 8 battle circles like this. After a short while there were only 5 left. Then 2 more circles ended the battle. There were only 3 circles left. There were constantly soldiers covered in blood being carried out of the crowd and immediately sent away. If they were not vomiting blood, then they were missing arms or legs. In this encirclement there were people constantly falling down and being trampled into chaos. There were roars and shouts coming from inside, overlapping each other. Although there were only 3 enemies left, the fierceness of these 3 people was beyond anyone's expectations. Before the operation, Chu Yang had said, "Try your best to capture them alive." But looking at the fierce battle in front of them, everyone knew that it was basically impossible to capture such an enemy alive. Even keeping their corpses intact would be a luxury. The battle lasted for less than a quarter of an hour. But the ironclad side paid the price of 50 people's lives. Nearly 100 people were injured. The one who was injured the furthest was 50 feet away. That revered martial artist was able to fight his way out 50 feet before he was heavily surrounded by the army and died in anger. One person's strength is great, but in the end he can't fight against an army. GMO said with a sigh. Jianghu is Jianghu and the army is the army. Chu Yang said, if the army was also Jianghu, then these experts could definitely break out of the encirclement. But the army isn't. Therefore, even an emperor-level expert would die if he fell into such a tight encirclement. GMO nodded and said, yes, the porridge is clear and the scale is clear. First 6. Although Jianghu people are fugitives, they know how to seek good fortune and avoid disaster to protect their own lives. Chu Yang said, but the army doesn't have their own preferences. They only have orders. They only have military orders. Once an order is given, they can only move forward. They can't retreat. Because if they retreat, they will immediately die at the hands of their own people's law enforcement team. This is the so-called military order is like a landslide. GMO said with a sigh, however, this is really too cruel for these ordinary soldiers. It is cruel, but the cruelty of war is also the mission of the army. Chu Yang sighed deeply. Where's the messenger? GMO let out a long sigh. GMO, you almost ruined our big plan. I haven't settled the score with you yet. Chu Yang looked at him coldly and said, you're lucky that you didn't get shot to death by your own people's arrows. If you act without discipline like this again, you will be responsible for the consequences. GMO rubbed his head and smiled bitterly. He knew that he was in the wrong, so he didn't dare to say anything. What did you mean by what you said to that guy? Why didn't I understand? Chu Yang asked. Chu Yang considered himself to be very knowledgeable. His previous life was rich enough. But he couldn't understand GMO's words. This made Minister Chu very puzzled. From beginning to end, Chu Yang only understood the words enemy and vomit. As for the rest, he could only express his lack of knowledge and shame. What's the point of that? GMO laughed hollowly and said, I was quick-witted. I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't expect that guy to be confused. But Chu Yang choked. He smiled bitterly and said, I'm afraid that anyone's first reaction would be the same when they suddenly meet someone who talks like that. You're really good. Minister Chu had nothing to say about this guy. Minister, the 8 enemy bandits have been killed. An officer who was besieging the enemy trotted over. He straightened his body and saluted. There was an eye-catching wound on his head. Blood was flowing down, but his face was cold and stiff. His eyes were cold and sharp. Good. Immediately check the casualties. There is no need to report this to the military. Just report it to Butian Pavilion. Chu Yang solemnly returned the salute. Yes. On behalf of my brothers, I thank the minister. The officer's eyes were filled with joy. Reporting to the military headquarters and waiting for the gold and silver to arrive would be a long process. Moreover, they would only be able to receive the same amount as those who died in battle. However, reporting to Butian Pavilion would allow the families of these fallen brothers to receive several times the compensation from the military headquarters. Since Minister Chu said so, he naturally had a plan. Chang'ang wiped away his sweat. His face was pale as he walked over Minister 3 revered martial artists and 5 great masters. None of them were caught. Hall leader Cheng's injuries were not light. There were several bloody wounds on his body. He walked with a limp. You found out? Only these few people. The highest was a revered martial artist? Chu Yang frowned. Yes. And only a 5th-level revered martial artist. When Chang'ang said this, he couldn't help but sweat. During this time he was on the verge of breaking through. Plus, under the pressure of King Chu, he was able to break through to 3rd-level revered martial artist. Now he was saying that the other party was only a 5th-level revered martial artist. The other party was 2 levels higher than him. Is there no one else? Chu Yang frowned. The battlefield has been cleaned up. Every place has been searched. Chang'ang said, there are no other traces. What about the secret room? Chu Yang asked. There is no secret room. Chang'ang said, this subordinate has found many experts in mechanism studies and searched the place thoroughly, but there are no traces of a secret room. Plus, this house was originally an official's home. Aside from a few cellars, there are no other secret rooms. That's not right. What Chu Yang was thinking was that when Yu Yun had reported back then, he had said the words of the black-robed man. The king level is here. No. This was not something that could be made up by Du Chang. Now that there were so many revered martial artists and great martial artists from Golden Horse Riders Department, it proved that this information was true. It was impossible that there was no one here. If even a mouse could not get out of the encirclement, then it was certain that there was someone in this house. And it was a king-level master. If they couldn't find him, then there must be a problem. Don't withdraw yet. Chu Yang pondered. His eyes slowly emitted a ruthless light. He said, maintain a tight seal. Then send people to bring water. Fill the entire house with water. Even if they turn into mice and burrow into the ground, I will make sure they come out. Yes. Chang'ang was a little unhappy. We have already confirmed that there is no secret room. Even if you use water, what's the use? It will only be a waste of manpower. But how can we not obey the minister's orders? Turn around. He gave a series of orders. Immediately, his friends started to move. General Li, please send some soldiers to help. We need to finish this as soon as possible. Chu Yang looked at the young general and said, no problem. General Li saluted and turned around. Third camp, listen to my orders. Go and bring water. Chapter 184. Torches. Illuminate this place. Archers, don't slack off. Gunmen, get ready. 10 layers of blockades. Chu Yang ordered block here, 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 and here. Don't let the water flow away. Boss, even if there are people inside, can't we wait for the concubines to arrive? Now isn't it too hasty? GMO frowned and asked. If there are people inside, they are king-level masters. Chu Yang said lightly, plus they are already injured. King-level masters recover very quickly. You know this. After tonight, even if the king-level masters recover a little bit of fighting power, we will lose a few more soldiers. With such losses, even if one more person dies, it will be a dereliction of duty on the commander's part. Chu Yang said, we can't give the enemy any chance to breathe. Even the slightest respite could lead to an irreparable disaster. Jimo said, oh. He looked at Chu Yang deeply and said, I see. But he thought in his heart. He can think of ordinary soldiers to this extent. How can he be wrong to his own brothers? While he was thinking, someone quickly carried a big bucket of water and poured it on the ground. Then, a lot of people ran over with basins and buckets in their hands. Even though there were many people, there were not enough tools. It seemed that they would need to continue for a while to achieve their goal. At this time, 40 to 50 people quickly piled up soil and built a trench on the road. Then a stream of water flowed over from there. It turned out that there was a well and a donkey over there. So those who were near kept flowing over here. Those who were far away carried water over. People shouted and horses neighed. It was very lively. Gradually, more and more people started to get their hands on tools. There was even a guy who found a large iron bucket that was used to feed the horses in the army. He used a single-wheeled carriage to bring the bucket over. This thing was even more addictive. It was enough for a family to have 50 buckets of water. Several commanders jumped up and down. They shouted with fierce faces, "Quick! Faster! Faster!" As time went by, the official's mansion gradually became a pool of water. As for the original cellars, they were filled to the brim at the very first moment. There was strength in numbers. Some carried the water, some shook the donkey with all their might, and some did their best to fill in the gaps. Even further away, several people carried the water in relays. The 20 water wells nearby were all taken over by the army in a short time. Water was slowly accumulating in this courtyard. The courtyard that was tens of acres of land was actually covered in water so deep that it didn't even reach their feet. Countless soldiers were quietly watching. Archers, snipers, spear throwers, knife throwers. All of them were ready for battle. The soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, their eyes sparkling. Down below, Kong Shang Xian, Yin Wu Fa, and the others, a total of 8 people, were anxiously stomping their feet in the secret chamber. When they heard that there was no movement outside, they thought that the army had retreated. Before they could breathe a sigh of relief, they heard people shouting and horses neighing outside. Due to the distance, they couldn't hear what was being said. They could only vaguely hear someone shouting, "Hurry! Hurry! Hurry!" A bad feeling rose in everyone's heart at the same time. What is the enemy doing? Not long after, the air in the secret chamber slowly became moist. It seemed that the temperature had dropped. Kong Shang Xian frowned as if he had thought of something. His face became colder and colder. After a while, the ceiling of the secret chamber was slowly seeping in water. Water is seeping in. Yin Wu Fa's eyes widened when he saw this. Everyone's expression changed. They finally realized that King of Hell Chu's plan was to drown them. This was extremely bad news for Zhou Zhou and the others. Although there was no exit, they were underground. With such a large space, as long as there was water above, sooner or later, it would seep in. Or the whole place would collapse. Even if they didn't drown, they would suffocate to death. Looking at the water droplets dripping down from the ceiling, they slowly formed a line. Slowly, the soil began to fall down piece by piece. The 2 king-level leaders were dumbstruck. The current situation could be said to be extremely bad. If they went out, they would be besieged by a large army. Although they did not know how many people there were, from the sounds coming from above, they knew that the number was not small. The 2 were seriously injured and did not have the confidence to break out of the encirclement. However, if they stayed here and did not move, they would silently become corpses. It was difficult to advance and difficult to retreat. A large piece of soil fell from above their heads. The water under their feet had already covered their shoes. The 2 king-level leaders wanted to cry but had no tears. "King of Hell Chu, aren't you too cruel? How did you come up with such a desperate plan?" King-level leader, "You must make a decision immediately. This place is about to collapse," a revered martial artist anxiously said. Almost before he finished speaking, large pieces of soil began to fall from above their heads. Kong Shang Xian roared with grief and indignation. His eyes were red as he shouted, "Rush out." As soon as these 3 words came out, the 3 revered martial artists, 2 martial great masters, and 1 iron horse rider all showed a tragic expression. Everyone knew what it meant to rush out at this time. Especially since the 2 king-level leaders had not recovered. There was no hope at all. The enemy was using a sea of people tactic. They did not even need to send out masters. Just ordinary soldiers would be enough to kill them. If they went out, they could only die in battle. If they stayed, they could only drown. If they died in battle, they could still get some benefits. If they drowned, that would be too unjust. Brothers, before we rush out, I have a few words to say. Kong Shang Xian tried his best to straighten his body. His eyes flashed with a cold light under the water. The others all stood ramrod straight and listened quietly. This time the situation is dangerous. Even I, Kong, do not have the confidence to escape. Therefore this battle may be the last time we brothers will fight together. Kong Shang Xian's fierce eyes flashed with an inexplicable warmth at this moment. He looked at his subordinates one by one and said in a low voice, "This time I, Kong Shang Xian, have implicated everyone. The cause of all this is because I acted without permission. This has led to an immeasurably serious consequence. I have also implicated my brothers and put them in a desperate situation." King-level leader, why do you say this? If everyone works together, even if we die, we will die together. We are all people of Jianghu. We have already accepted life and death. It is just this matter. Thank you for your understanding. If there is a next life, I, Kong Shang Xian, hope that with my brothers we can travel through Jianghu and dominate the world. We will use all of our strength to unify the world. Kong Shang Xian's voice was heavy. This sad Saber King seemed to have a premonition of the final destination of his life. Every word was filled with all of his emotions. It was as if they were being pulled out from his heart. Second brother. We might still have a chance. Why do you have to be so pessimistic? Yin Wufa felt as if his chest was about to explode. He glared and angrily said, "Listen to me." Kong Shang Xian smiled and walked in front of Yin Wufa. He gently patted his shoulder and said, "Third brother, if we can return to Great Zhao, don't talk about revenge so easily." Finished speaking, he turned his head and bowed deeply toward his subordinates. King-level leader, what are you doing? The only surviving command horse rider fell to his knees. His tears fell like rain. At most, we brothers will die together. King-level leader, there is no need. There is no need. His voice choked and he could not continue. No. The three of you have a big chance. You are not injured, you can definitely escape. Kong Shang Xian seriously said, "I only ask you, if possible, please save my third brother." Yin Wufa angrily yelled, "Second brother, if you don't leave, how can I leave? When we became sworn brothers, we said that we would rather die together than live together. Do you want me to be a heartless person? When the time comes, we will all die together. Of course. If we must die, we brothers will die together." Kong Shang Xian looked at Yin Wufa emotionally. He silently said in his heart, "Third brother, you saved my life. Today, even if I die, I will let you leave safely." He did not say anything else. He quietly looked at his remaining brothers. After a long time he said, "Remember what I said." As he said these words, his eyes were fixed on the command horse rider. He solemnly said, "Old Sa, after so many years, this is my last order. It is also my last request in this life." The command horse rider kneeled on the ground. His whole body trembled. His tears fell like rain as he repeatedly nodded. Kong Shang Xian looked at Yin Wufa with nostalgia and softly said, "Brothers, I really want to ride together with you in Jianghu." These words were almost inaudible. With that he turned around and strode out. He did not look back. "Charge out!" Yin Wufa angrily roared. He secretly pulled the command horse rider and whispered, "Old Sa, if I can't do it, you must pull the second king-level leader out. Please." Then, he did not wait for the old Sa to reply. He straightened his body and followed behind Kong Shang Xian step by step. The old Sa was stunned. At this critical moment of life and death, the two king-level leaders, who were known for their coldness and ruthlessness, used their own actions to express the word brothers. "I can sacrifice myself, but my brothers must live." On the ground, muddy water splashed everywhere. Kong Shang Xian and Yin Wufa, both with their thin bodies, walked in the dark secret room. However, their broad shoulders seemed to be carrying the entire earth for each other. A fierce aura was slowly emitted from the two of them. Slowly, like a tsunami, it surged through the narrow passageway of the secret chamber. Above, mud fell like rain. On the ground, the water had already reached the knees. Chapter 185. Kong Shang Xian suddenly stretched out his hands. At the same time, the shadowless blade that had once angered the lower three heavens and caused the lower three heavens to tremble suddenly appeared in his right hand. With a schwa sound, he drew a large circle above his head. The wall that had already become soft suddenly caved in. With a loud rumbling sound, the entire building collapsed along with the collapse. Kong Shang Xian's skinny body turned into a beam of light and quickly flew up. He was the first to rush up. At this time, whoever went up first would undoubtedly suffer the fiercest attacks of the enemy. It was the most dangerous. However, this king-level leader who only knew how to use others was willing to use his own flesh and blood to open a path for the first time in his life. For his dying brother. Boom! The entire ground caved in. The entire courtyard was filled with water. Thus everyone was watching from afar. There were also soldiers who were trying their best to bring water over. All of a sudden the ground collapsed, revealing a huge space. Everyone was stunned. Word! At this moment a thin figure, dressed in black and holding a shining saber, rose up from the ground like a demon god. He stood in the waist-deep water and his eyes were sharp. In the darkness of the night they were like two spears, flashing through the sky like lightning, emitting a dazzling brilliance. His body was full of mud and dirty. Standing in the water, only his upper body was exposed. However, his entire body emitted a fierce aura. He was like a trapped lion that had nowhere else to go, but he still displayed the might of a king. An unyielding fighting spirit. The turbulent water gushed in from under his feet, stirring up turbid waves, making him look like an underwater demon who was walking up step by step on the waves. After a few more roars, 7 people appeared next to this person. There were only 8 people, but they were facing an army of 10,000. Their faces showed no fear. They actually emitted a biting cold aura. In the distance, Chu Yang's pupils suddenly shrank. They came out. 2 king-level leaders Guosha were here. The information was indeed correct. Chang'ang roared. He was about to lead people to rush up, but Chu Yang waved his hand and stopped him. May I ask which 2 king-level experts of the Golden Horse Riders Department are on the opposite side? Chu Yang casually asked. Kong Shang Xian stared at Chu Yang from afar. After a long time he finally smiled and said, "You are King of Hell Chu, right?" Chu Yang's face was covered with a black cloth. He said yes. How could I dare to call myself the King of Hell in the presence of 2 king-level experts? He deserves it. Kong Shang Xian's gaze swept through the air and landed on Chu Yang's face without any emotion. Chu Yang felt as if his face was being pierced by needles. I was able to move unhindered in the 3 heavens. Even when the 4 great clans joined hands, they were still unable to force me into a dead end. But you did it. Respect. King of Hell Chu, you are very scheming. Good move. Kong Shang Xian stared at Chu Yang for a while before he finally let out a long sigh. These few words of praise contained too many complex emotions. After seeing the real King of Hell Chu, Kong Shang Xian finally understood that he had been tricked by this guy. Looking at this guy's aura, he definitely did not surpass the martial master level. Therefore, the 3 jade thrones that appeared before and after the fight with Yin Wu Fa must have been part of King of Hell Chu's crafty scheme to frame us. Just as Diwu Qingro said, he used the people from the other 3 heavens clans to train. He hated himself for being played in the palm of his hand. It was not until he was in a desperate situation that he finally realized. But it was too late. I don't dare. Chu Yang said in a dignified voice. May I ask if you are Sad Saber King? Kong Shang Xian. Who I am is no longer important. Kong Shang Xian chuckled and shook his head. His eyes slowly turned as he looked at the silent army around him. The corners of his mouth curled up into an arrogant smile as he said, "This kind of formation, you really think too highly of me. There are at least 50,000 people around, right? King-level expert, you underestimate yourself too much." Chu Yang said calmly, "Just for this place alone, in order to keep all of you here, I've mobilized more than 15,000 archers." Chu Yang's sharp eyes looked at Kong Shang Xian. More than a third of all the archers in Iron Cloud Citadel are here. There are still more coming from the outside. Kong Shang Xian laughed and said, 15,000 archers. This is enough to decide the outcome of a battle. Even if I die, I will die with honor. Chu Yang casually said, right now, this area has become an iron bucket. In the direction of King's Citadel, the King's Citadel guards have not moved and are fully focused on defense. The east, west, north and south gates are all under lockdown. Plus it is too far from here. He looked at Kong Shang-Xen with pity. You are already at the end of your rope. You want to persuade me to surrender? Kong Shang-Xen chuckled. His eyes suddenly became cold. Then you underestimate me too much. You underestimate Golden Horse Riders Department. Not at all. Chu Yang respectfully said. A king-level expert must have dignity. Even though I am not a king-level expert, I do not want to humiliate a strong person. You should end your own lives. Chu Yang calmly said. Let me also maintain my unyielding respect for a king-level expert. Kong Shang-Xen laughed mockingly. End our own lives? King of Hell Chu, do you think you can dream while standing? He let out a long roar and fiercely said, King of Hell Chu, even if I cannot avoid dying here today, you should prepare for a large amount of compensation from the military. Chu Yang coldly smiled. Both sides were stalling for time. Kong Shang-Xen was stalling for time to recover his martial strength. Even if he could recover a little bit more, it would be good. However, Chu Yang was stalling for time to wait for the encirclement to be completed. Chu Yang's heart faintly had a glimmer of hope. Tai Butian's support. Even though there was not much hope right now, as long as the two Shadow Guardians came, there would be no unnecessary casualties. They would be able to capture these two seriously injured king-level experts. They had not made a move yet, but Chu Yang knew that once they made a move, the other side would fight like a cornered beast. The casualties on his side would be extremely high. The counterattack of a king-level expert on the brink of death would definitely be earth-shattering. Kong Shang-Xen was right. If they wanted to capture these two king-level experts, the price they had to pay would be extremely heavy. Time slowly passed. Finally, the soldiers from the outside gradually arrived. 3 layers on the inside and 3 layers on the outside. The encirclement was like an iron bucket. Chu Yang was about to give an order when suddenly, a horse galloped in from the outside. The person on the horse was Chun Yutong. Chun Yutong passed through the encirclement and went straight to Chu Yang. He hurriedly whispered, Minister, the crown prince has gone to the palace. The emperor's illness has relapsed. After the crown prince entered the palace, he did not come out. Why didn't you say so earlier? Chu Yang was furious. He almost wanted to slap him. Doesn't that mean I've given the enemy some time to catch their breath, but the reinforcements I want are out of the question? Chun Yutong's face turned pale. After he arrived at the crown prince's residence, he immediately rushed to the palace and waited for Tai Butian to summon him. However, Tai Butian did not appear. Until Du Shiqing came and said that the emperor was not well. The two king-level experts were protecting the emperor's vitality. When Chun Yutong heard this, he knew that the two king-level experts would not be able to come. He immediately rushed back, but it was already at this time. King-level expert Kong. Sorry for the offense. Chu Yang shouted, kill. Since the reinforcements were not coming, then they would have to use their current strength to pay the price. Chu Yang made a prompt decision and issued this cruel order at the first moment. This roar set off the beginning of the war. With this order, a rain of arrows covered the sky. Thousands of arrows turned into the first wave of attack. The second wave of arrows was also shot out almost at the same time. Spread out. Kong Shang-Xen roared. The 8 people he was worried about also exploded at the same time and scattered in 8 different directions. At the same time, Kong Shang-Xen stomped his feet. His whole body flashed with a golden light. The water in the courtyard suddenly surged like a screen and spread out in all directions like countless angry dragons, facing the rain of arrows. With a whoosh, all the torches in the vicinity were extinguished by the water at the same time. The distance was brightly lit, but this courtyard had turned into a shimmering darkness. Without a sound, the Iron Horse Knight turned into a hedgehog and fell to the ground without making a sound. The 2 martial great masters were halfway there when their bodies were hit by arrows at the same time. Blood splattered out of their bodies as they screamed in pain. Dozens of arrows were mercilessly shot into their bodies. The 2 of them shouted at the same time, King-level leader, your brother will go first. Let us open the way for you. Before they finished speaking, the 2 used all their strength to throw out their weapons. Then they laughed miserably and slowly fell into the water, creating a red splash. A saber and a sword passed through space like a meteor and flew into the crowd dozens of feet away. Screams resounded. Brother, wait a step. We will be there soon. Old Sa laughed heartily. Kong Shang Xian and the remaining 5 people had already closed the distance of 300 feet like meteors. The 2 king-level experts were like 2 sharp arrows, whistling through the air. The rain of arrows was like a waterfall. Kong Shang Xian's shadowless saber was constantly flying. Occasionally, the saber would sweep horizontally and cut all the arrows in half. His other hand would grab the arrowheads, and in the next moment, they would turn into cold stars and be reflected back. The saber did not stop, and his hand did not stop. The sound of the arrows piercing into the flesh of the human body was unceasingly heard. Many of the surrounding soldiers had already died under this counterattack. Kong Shang Xian was rapidly flying. His long hair fluttered behind him, but his face was as calm as water. Under the illumination of the lanterns in the distance, although it was dark, his eyes emitted a faint light like that of a hungry wolf. His current state was at its peak. It was as if he was not injured at all. The dense rain of arrows could not hit his body. Occasionally, an arrow would break through the saber net, but it would be knocked to the ground by his protective energy. He was like a hurricane, like a burning torch. He completely disregarded his own body and turned the last bit of heat in his body into a flame that could burn people, rising fiercely. He had already rushed within 200 feet. Chapter 186. The javelins of the 3,000 javelins turned into black rays of light. From different directions, from different angles, they all shot towards the same target. The group of 5. Kong Shang Xian let out a long roar. His body suddenly straightened up. His toes touched the tip of the first wave of javelins. His body soared into the air and met the second wave of javelins. His hand suddenly chopped down. With a loud shout, his body continued to rise. His long saber flashed again and again. His body rose more than 100 feet into the air. Then, like a streak of flowing light, he drew a strange arc. Behind him, there were flashes, and rows of phantoms suddenly appeared. But he himself had already swept across the sky, and with a dazzling saber light, he directly crashed into the army formation. The saber flashed fiercely as if a small sun had suddenly appeared. At the front of the army, there was a sudden explosion of blood. The waves of blood surged. Kong Shang Xian cleared a large area in an instant. Then he immediately killed his way out. To help his brothers, Yin Wufa held a javelin that he had just intercepted and crazily rushed forward. There were 3 or 4 arrows stuck in his body. Of the remaining 3, Old Sa was the first to charge through the rain of arrows and javelins. A 7th-grade revered martial artist followed closely behind him. Together with Yin Wufa, they formed a small triangular formation and rushed out. However, the last 4th-grade revered martial artist was a step too slow. When the rain of arrows was about to reach him, he took a deep breath. However, it was this breath that cut off his life. The spears that followed were like deadly bolts of lightning, nailing him to the ground. Then, the continuous rain of spears and arrows smashed his body into minced meat in an instant. The rain of arrows was still tirelessly falling, and the javelins were still falling endlessly. Yin Wufa and the others were trapped less than 50 feet away from the army. Seeing that they were in imminent danger, Kong Shang Xian roared and turned around. He rushed out of the army. Countless bodies were thrown into the air by him. Then the bright saber light broke through the darkness and reached Yin Wufa's side. "Follow me." Kong Shang Xian's voice was already hoarse. Without stopping, he immediately turned around and led the 3 of them into the army. The rain of arrows and spears suddenly stopped. The soldiers roared angrily, "Kill!" They came from all directions like a tidal wave. Close combat. Chu Yang immediately ordered. "Minister, it would be better to wait for a moment. These 2 king-level experts are at their peak. So, it would be better to let these soldiers exhaust their strength. Then our experts will go all out, and will secure the victory in one fell swoop." The words of this revered martial artist from the imperial palace made Chu Yang fly into a rage. He slapped the revered martial artist's face ruthlessly. "Bastard! Loss?" In order to deplete their strength, Benja, a good person, they were using the lives of their soldiers. Your life is important, but are the lives of these soldiers not important? Get him. If you slow down, I'll take the heads of your entire family. On the other side, Chang'ong roared and led the experts of Butian Pavilion to charge forward without any fear of death. Everyone charge. As an expert, he had to bear more responsibilities at this time. Chu Yang roared, "For our brothers, we have to fight for a chance to survive." The battlefield had turned into a meat grinder. Kongshang Xian and Yin Wu Fa were fighting fiercely. Two king-level experts and two high-level revered martial artists. At this moment, their fighting prowess made everyone who saw them tremble in fear. Even though they were all seriously injured, even though their bodies were full of arrows, it was as if they were possessed by gods and demons. They did not fall down. They were fighting. In this desperate battle, they had already charged 500 feet forward. An endless stream of soldiers was rushing toward them. With a miserable scream, the 8th-grade revered martial artist suddenly screamed in fear. A soldier put down the body of his comrade and suddenly jumped up with red eyes. He completely ignored his own safety and hugged the corpse. Hugging the corpse was the same as hugging a saber. The saber flashed and the soldier's 2 forearms flew off. However, his remaining arms were still wrapped around the 8th-grade revered martial artist's body. He held on tightly and opened his mouth. His white teeth also fiercely bit down. The revered martial artist screamed in pain. Immediately, the soldier was blown into pieces by him. The soldier only managed to hold him back for a short moment. If this was a normal situation, this moment would not be much. But right now he was surrounded by an army. There were dozens of sabers, swords, and spears all around him. Just as he pushed the soldier away, 7 or 8 soldiers jumped up at the same time. Their faces were ferocious, and their sabers slashed down without any regard for their own safety. The spearman in the back also fiercely thrust forward to greet him. The revered martial artist screamed and tried his best to dodge, but a spear still pierced his abdomen. It was not easy for him to get here. He had almost overdrawn all his strength. At this moment he did not have the strength to dodge. His right hand grabbed the spear in his abdomen. He screamed in despair and used his saber to pierce through the spearman. The saber flashed and suddenly chopped down. His right hand flew out of his body. He screamed in pain as his only remaining left hand grabbed the soldier's neck. However, at the same time 7 or 8 sabers fell down. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. His hand also brushed past the throats of 4 soldiers. The 4 corpses had not yet fallen down when another 10 or 20 people rushed forward. Wild cries and shrill screams rang out at the same time. One saber cut off his left hand. One saber cut off his right leg. He fell to the ground. A soldier threw away his saber and suddenly grabbed the spear that was still in his abdomen. He fiercely twisted it. With a loud roar, he lifted him into the air. Kill! Countless sabers and swords greeted him at the same time. Suddenly blood and flesh flew everywhere. There were only 3 people left. Kongshang Xian angrily looked at King of Hell Chu in the distance. He was so angry that his teeth were about to break. The enemy did not make a move. As long as King of Hell Chu made a move, with his and Yin Wu Fa's strength, they could use King of Hell Chu as a distraction to fight and retreat. The army would not be as fearless as they were now. However, King of Hell Chu did not move. This made them lose their greatest chance of survival. All around Kongshang Xian were corpses. At a glance, there were several hundred corpses. There were also many bloody alleys in the distance. These were the results of Kongshang Xian's efforts. After a long battle, coupled with his injuries, Kongshang Xian gradually felt that his vision was blurring. The strength in his body was also gradually decreasing. This situation made Kongshang Xian suddenly realize that death was approaching. I can't hold on much longer. Could it be that I am really at the end of my road? Once this thought arose, Kongshang Xian suddenly felt unreconciled. How can I die like this? How can I die so easily? Suddenly, he crazily chopped out 177 sabers. 40 or 50 people screamed at the same time. Suddenly he shouted, "Wu Fa!" Yin Wu Fa was already soaked in blood. Hearing this, he shouted, "Second brother!" His situation was not good. If Old Sa was not by his side, this king-level leader would have been turned into minced meat. Old Sa! Kongshang Xian roared again. Old Sa shouted, "I'm here! I'm here! I'm here!" The 3 people continued to roar. It was as if the fact that they were still alive gave them great strength. In the distance, Chu Yang's expression changed and he said, "This is not good. Send out the order." The bugle horn sounded. The people who had just participated in the attack retreated like a tide. Another group of soldiers roared and rushed forward. These two king-level leaders are really two good men. GMO, who was next to Chu Yang, exclaimed. Not bad. Chu Yang watched the battle with rapt attention. He constantly made hand signals and gave out orders. He said seriously, "Unfortunately, they are our enemies." "What a pity," GMO said regretfully. Just as the words "what a pity" came out of GMO's mouth, the battle situation suddenly changed. "Come closer." Kong Shang Xian's roar shook the night sky. Okay. Yin Wu Fa and the old Sa roared at the same time. It was as if they were moving the entire battlefield. The sounds of battle were being controlled by these two people, and they were moving closer to Kong Shang Xian's side. "Don't let them get close," Chu Yang shouted. He was sensitive enough to feel that once the three of them got close to each other, there would be an unexpected change that would occur. Chang'ong roared. In the middle of the battle, he led his subordinates to intercept them without any regard for their lives. The people on the other side were rolling. Kong Shang Xian was like a mad tiger, killing his way over. Wherever he went, countless pillars of blood spurted out. His path forward was dyed red with blood. The stirred blood light seemed to be emitting blood-colored fireworks for the sorrowful throne at any time and place. The entire battlefield seemed to have fallen into a nightmare. Everything seemed to have become unreal. Before the encirclement, everyone thought that Chu Yang was making a big fuss over nothing. In order to deal with a few people, he had mobilized an army of 100,000. But now, everyone was awed by the battle prowess of these few people. Are they still human? Under the encirclement of an army of 100,000 and the threat of 15,000 archers, they were still able to fight to this extent. The number of casualties had already reached a shocking level. If it were not for the fact that so many people were mobilized at the same time, even if their numbers were reduced by half, these people would not have been able to stop them. All the brave warriors in the army, as long as they went up, were dealt with in a breath's time. Those martial artists and martial masters, whom they had once looked up to, had all turned into corpses in mere moments. It was said that these people were seriously injured. If they were not injured, the commander shuddered. The distance between Kong Shang Xian and Yin Wu Fa was only 50 feet. But this 50 feet distance under Chu Yang's command became a natural moat. Almost all the masters were gathered here. If they tried to force their way through, even if Kong Shang Xian was not injured, he was not confident. Chapter 187. Immediately after, Kong Shang Xian's throne in the air suddenly emitted a golden light. Kong Shang Xian suddenly jumped up from the ground. His body suddenly spun, and his saber became one with his body, turning into a bright ball of light. Then he shot into the sky. Woo! A strange sound was heard. The bright saber flashed with a dreamlike brilliance in the sky and headed straight for the crowd. Chu Yang panicked and roared, "Scatter!" This is the life saber technique. The life saber technique was a king using his own life to fight. This was not the same as being one with the saber, but the power was the same. With the saber as one, there was still a chance to recover. However, with the life saber technique, one's life force would be burned away, and there would be no chance to recover. Because of this, the life saber technique was also known as the countdown to life. Because once it was used, the person's life would enter the countdown. Sad Saber King Kong Shang Xian was finally going all out. Once this move was unleashed, even if no one attacked Kong Shang Xian, he would still die without a doubt once the aftershock of this move dissipated. Chu Yang had been waiting for this moment for a long time. How could he be willing to let his subordinates die for the sake of a doomed Sad Saber sovereign? Chang'ong heard this and roared, "Scatter!" He quickly rolled away, but his back was still hit by the saber. A large piece of flesh flew out. Hall Master Chang was in so much pain that his whole body trembled violently. Under Kong Shang Xian's desperate efforts, Yin Wu Fa and the three old men finally met up. "Second brother!" Yin Wu Fa crazily screamed as tears streamed down his face. "Yin Wu Fa!" Kong Shang Xian screamed to the sky. His long hair flew up. "Don't let me die with regrets." "Second brother!" Yin Wu Fa screamed. His whole body suddenly trembled violently. "Let's go!" Kong Shang Xian roared. Suddenly, his whole body emitted a golden light. He grabbed Yin Wufe and shouted, "Old Sa, are you willing to accompany me on this road to the netherworld?" Old Sa laughed aloud and roared, "I was just about to accompany my wife to see this so-called nether spring. Good. Today I Kong Shang Xian have wronged you. On the Yellow Springs Road, let me apologize to you." Kong Shang Xian roared and suddenly took a deep breath. The golden light on his body became extremely dazzling at this moment. Then he suddenly leaped up. However, he only leaped 10 feet before he stomped his feet down. Old Sa roared. His body flashed, and he appeared under Kong Shang Xian's feet. His two palms condensed all of his strength, and he suddenly pushed upward. Boom! Kong Shang Xian's feet suddenly landed on the Old Sa's palms. With a strong recoil, a king-level master and a middle-level revered martial artist worked together to push him forward. Kong Shang Xian's hand that was holding Yin Wufe suddenly turned into a rainbow that shocked the sky. It flew up 300 feet in the air, and then slanted for several hundred feet, flying towards Chu Yang's position. Behind him, sonic booms resounded in the air. A wisp of white smoke suddenly spread out. "Protect the minister!" Chang'ong screamed and jumped up from the ground. He didn't care about the blood and flesh on his back. He screamed and rushed towards Chu Yang with all his might. Whoosh! Kong Shang Xian's body had already reached the highest point. If he flew any further, he could only fall. At this moment, Kong Shang Xian warmly looked at Yin Wufe in his hand. His eyes emitted deep emotions. Yin Wufe crazily screamed, "Second brother! Don't!" Kong Shang Xian turned a deaf ear and suddenly roared towards the sky. In the sky, the throne formed by the golden light suddenly spun like the sun. Then with a loud bang, it exploded into countless golden stars and then disappeared into the night sky. Kong Shang Xian's body strangely stopped in midair. Then he suddenly flew up 7 or 8 feet. Suddenly he roared, "Brother!" His arms spun like a windmill, and he threw Yin Wufe's body out. Just as he made his move, Kong Shang Xian's body suddenly flashed again. Blood crazily spewed out from his mouth. He quickly chased after Yin Wufe with both hands and feet. He used an unimaginable speed to chase after Yin Wufe, who was flying at high speed. Hundreds of palms continuously landed on Yin Wufe's soles. Then he screamed, "Don't let me die with regrets." Suddenly he spun around and ruthlessly kicked Yin Wufe's soles. Whoosh! Behind Yin Wufe, there was a series of sonic booms as he flew away at high speed. He was like a meteor flashing in the night sky. In just a few moments he was already more than 1,000 feet away, and could no longer be seen. This is the last move of a king-level master, turning into a golden light. At this moment I am the king. It is to shatter one's own soul. No matter how injured a king-level master is, in this short period of time, he can use the explosion of his soul to double his strength. Jimo's face was heavy as he said, "This move is invincible." And this king-level expert used this trick to help his own brother escape. Chu Yang sighed and said, "Even if they are enemies, this brotherly love is truly touching. I am envious." Gmo nodded. At this moment, a golden light flashed in the sky. A loud roar sounded, "King of Hell Chu, give me your life." Kong Shang Xian used the last of his power to suddenly descend from 400 feet in the sky toward Chu Yang. "King of Hell Chu, give me your life." Old Sa was on the ground, but he also mustered the last of his strength and rushed toward Chu Yang without regard for his own life. Yin Wufe was not out of danger yet. Only by creating more chaos here would Yin Wufe have a chance to escape. Therefore, Old Sa and Kong Shang Xian were fighting with their lives on the line. Countless figures leaped into the air, and a rain of black arrows and spears shot into the sky like meteors. Kong Shang Xian laughed out loud. Jin Ran did not dodge. His eyes flashed with a ferocious light as he rushed toward Chu Yang. At this moment, all of his life force had been converted into one attack. His soul had been shattered, and his golden crown had disappeared. However, he still rushed forward. The sky full of arrows was like 100 rivers converging into the sea as they converged on Kong Shang Xian's body. At first, he was still able to shake them away, but later on they pierced his flesh. A spear was thrown from Jimo's hand. With a whoosh, it pierced through Kongshang Xian's abdomen. Kongshang Xian did not slow down and continued to rush forward. He was only 3 feet away from Chu Yang. At this moment in his eyes there was no sky, no earth, no enemies, no tens of thousands of soldiers. There was only one person. King of Hell Chu. This was the real king of Hell Chu. Kongshang Xian did not care about the wounds that others inflicted on his body. It was as if he did not feel anything. He only had one goal: to kill King of Hell Chu. Close. Kongshang Xian's body was covered with countless arrows as he finally arrived in front of Chu Yang. Jimo roared and fiercely stabbed out with his sword. Kongshang Xian's 7 orifices were bleeding. His hand suddenly shot out. Dang! The sword and the saber collided in the air. Jimo roared and spat out blood as he retreated. The shadowless saber and the long sword, these 2 divine weapons, exploded in the air at the same time. Kongshang Xian's momentum did not decrease as he went straight for Chu Yang. Chu Yang's eyes were as cold as ice. He was waiting for the right moment. He could not dodge. If he dodged, he would lose the geographical advantage. Under the momentum, even if Kongshang Xian was on the verge of death, he could still kill him. He could only face it head-on. Kongshang Xian was already an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as he could block it, he would be finished. But at this moment, Jimo suddenly roared and rushed forward again. His body moved horizontally and blocked in front of Chu Yang. His 2 palms crossed as he attacked. He knew that Chu Yang was only a martial artist. Even if Kongshang Xian was weakened to this extent, Chu Yang still could not block him. At this moment he did not know why he was so excited and rushed forward. Kongshang Xian fiercely rushed forward. Their palms met. Bang! Gotcha! Jimo's wrists were broken. Immediately after, Kongshang Xian's other hand pierced towards Jimo's chest like lightning. Damn it! Kongshang Xian's eyes were full of anger. He was about to succeed, but a young martial great master appeared out of nowhere. At this moment, Kongshang Xian's hatred for Jimo surpassed everything else. Jimo roared and fiercely kicked out. His heart was cold. He was unable to dodge Kongshang Xian's palm. If Kongshang Xian's palm hit, Jimo would die without a doubt. A shadow flashed. Chu Yang's indifferent black-robed figure appeared in front of Jimo. Bang! Kongshang Xian's palm, which was supposed to hit Jimo's chest, mercilessly hit Chu Yang's chest. At the same time, Chu Yang's left palm hit Kongshang Xian's chest. His right palm condensed Calamity Sword and suddenly pierced into Kongshang Xian's heart. Suddenly it twisted. Gotcha! Gotcha! Kongshang Xian and Chu Yang, who were at the end of their rope, had their ribs broken. Both of them simultaneously spat out blood and powerlessly flew backwards. Boss! Jimo screamed. His eyes immediately turned red. Then, he threw himself backwards, and used his body as a cushion to catch Chu Yang. Chu Yang spat out a mouthful of blood. He endured the pain in his chest and lightly said, "You were willing to sacrifice your life for me. How can I let you die?" Jimo was stunned. Chu Yang's words were vague, but he understood the meaning behind them. You treat me as a brother. If you were willing to sacrifice your life for me, I would also be willing to die for you. Kongshang Xian's body flipped backwards. Blood splattered on the ground and he suddenly stopped moving. He stood there proudly. His eyes were like sharp swords as he looked in Chu Yang's direction. Chu Yang struggled. He held onto Jimo's shoulder and stood up. His eyes met Kongshang Xian's from afar. Kongshang Xian's eyes revealed a trace of disappointment. Then he stood there as if he was using all of his strength to slowly move his eyes away and look at the night sky. That was the direction Yin Wu Fa had left in. Kongshang Xian's eyes were full of longing. He gently let out a breath. His entire body suddenly became still and motionless. Don't touch him! Chu Yang shouted at a few soldiers who were about to rush forward. He sighed and said, "He is already dead." Yes, this generation's king-level master, who once dominated the lower 3 heavens, was no longer breathing, although his eyes were still wide open and his body was still standing. Chapter 188. King-level master. The old saw was already covered in wounds and had reached the final stage. Suddenly, he let out a heart-wrenching roar and jumped up. However, he was pierced by hundreds of spears at the same time while he was still in the air. The battlefield suddenly fell into silence. Looking at the entire area that was in a mess, looking at all the buildings that had collapsed in this battle, everyone felt as if they had just woken up from a dream. Only the fresh blood on the ground was still flowing quietly, even making a slight splashing sound. It's finally over. Chu Yang stood up tiredly and muttered, "The price of encircling 2 king-level masters is actually so heavy." His body swayed and he almost fell to the ground. Kong Shang Xian's last attack, even though he was like a lamp without oil, was still enough to almost kill Chu Yang. If that palm had landed on Jimo's body, it would have hit his chest. Chu Yang suddenly stepped forward, and that palm landed on Chu Yang's right chest. His internal organs were shaken, and several of his ribs were broken. Fortunately, Kong Shang Xian's last bit of strength was only at this point. Otherwise, if the Tribulation Sword Spirit did not take the initiative to attack, Chu Yang would not have been able to save his life. Count the casualties. Do your best to chase after the other king-level master who escaped. Chu Yang gave this order. He felt something sweet in his throat and spat out another mouthful of blood. He was on the verge of collapsing. Right now, Chu Yang was very confused. What was Tai Butian doing? Why didn't he come for such a big event? Also, the 2 shadow protectors were nowhere to be seen. If one of them came, this battle would not have been so tragic. Finally, the battle came to an end. Ironcloud Citadel also fell into a state of relative peace. The pursuit of the remaining members of Golden Horse Riders Department did not relax. The search inside Ironcloud Citadel was still ongoing. All of Ironcloud Citadel's areas leading to Great Zhao were also being searched. However, Chu Yang knew that this would not be of much use. The chances of finding and capturing the king-level leader who had already escaped was simply too small. Right now, Chu Yang was lying on a soft bed, trying his best to heal. Jimo's injuries were much lighter than Chu Yang's. After staying here for a while, Jimo felt uncomfortable. So, Chu Yang had no choice but to send him back to the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. Jimo didn't say anything when he left. It seemed that tonight's outing with Chu Yang was just an ordinary trip. As for getting injured, it was just a common occurrence for a man of Jianghu. However, his eyes were obviously more dignified and thoughtful. The way he looked at Chu Yang was also more respectful than before. He was no longer so frivolous. These descendants of aristocratic families were all extremely shrewd. It can't be said that I'll be loyal to Chu Yang for saving my life this time. Even if I die, I won't leave him. This is impossible. Moreover, the reason why Chu Yang had gotten injured for him was because GMO had attacked him first. However, Chu Yang had firmly planted a seed of the word brother in his heart this time. What is a brother? Kong Shang Xian and Yin Wu Fa, who were bathed in blood and fighting in desperate situations, were able to help each other and shed their last drop of blood for their brother. They were the perfect embodiment of the word brother. Kong Shang Xian was a notorious bandit, and Yin Wu Fa was a notorious assassin. There was one more thing: they were both enemies. Plus, they had caused great harm to their own troops. However, their bad reputation and hostile status could not cover up the brotherly love between the two of them. Even though they hated the two of them to the bone, there was no man in the world who did not envy their brotherly love. This is what a brother is. GMO was deep in thought. When he returned, the sky was already bright. Chu Yang was quietly lying down in Butian Pavilion. His mind was replaying Kong Shang Xian's last move over and over again. That brilliant saber light. The golden crown that exploded in the air. Finally, the gaze that he used to look in the direction that his brother escaped was so meaningful and sincere. Thinking about it, Chu Yang sighed. Such a brother is worthy of being called a brother. For Yin Wu Fa to have such a brother in this life, regardless of life or death, he would have no regrets. 3 of Chu Yang's ribs were broken. Every time he sighed, he felt a piercing pain. However, this pain made him remember Kong Shang Xian's expression even more clearly, so he sighed again. In the end, Kong Shang Xian died at Chu Yang's hands. The tip of the Calamity Sword pierced his heart and killed him at that moment. Regarding killing Kong Shang Xian, Chu Yang did not regret it. Witnessing the love between his enemies, Chu Yang felt very moved. But, An enemy is an enemy. Minister Chu could not help but sigh again. Chu Yang's sighs made Wu Qianqian, who was taking care of him, feel very distressed. She could not help but softly advise him, "You are already seriously injured. Why are you sighing like this? Take care of your injuries. No matter how big the matter is, wait until you are better." Hearing her words, Chu Yang sighed again and asked, "Recently, is there any news from the sect?" "No." Wu Qianqian's expression was a little sad. She lowered her head and said, "Father has not sent any news for a long time." Chu Yang sighed softly. His eyes were a little perplexed as he looked outside the window. He softly said, "Every time I am injured, I miss Shizhi." Wu Qianqian's hands trembled. She was startled for a while. She looked at Chu Yang's eyes and suddenly became very gentle. She softly said, "Me too. Every time I am injured or sick, I want to stay in my mother's arms and act like a spoiled child. This is human nature." Wu Qianqian suddenly felt that at this moment, Chu Yang was really like a little martial brother of his age. When injured, he would always be weak and emotional. Right now, she could clearly feel that Chu Yang was very lonely. He was like a child who was hurt but could not find his family. He needed her to take care of him and protect him. However, she didn't know that the injuries Chu Yang was talking about were from his previous life. In his previous life, Chu Yang was alone. Every time he got injured, he would curl up in a corner and recuperate by himself. He would always remember how Meng Chaoran had taken care of him when he was young. Every time he thought about it, his heart would always be filled with endless bitterness and sadness. Chu Yang chuckled and said, "But I will not act like a spoiled child." Wu Qianqian coquettishly rolled her eyes at him and said, "You are a man. If you act like a spoiled child, you will become a joke." As she said this, she picked up the medicine that was a little cold. She used a spoon to scoop it up and tasted it. She leisurely sat by the bed and gently said, "Come, take the medicine. Be good and open your mouth." Wu Qianqian's voice sounded like she was coaxing a child. Chu Yang did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Senior Du will come in a while. It seems that the palace is very busy," Wu Qianqian said. "Why bother Senior Du with such a small injury?" Chu Yang's eyes faintly flashed. At this moment, Minister, His Highness is here. Chen Yutong came in to report. Before he finished speaking, Tai Butian had already walked in. His face was still calm and indifferent, but the depths of his eyes were filled with fatigue and bloodshot. "Minister Chu, I am sorry. I am late." Tai Butian stood in front of Chu Yang's bed. The first thing he said was an apology. This was beyond Wu Qianqian's expectations. The first thing the heir to the throne of a country said was an apology. "There is nothing to be sorry about." Chu Yang said casually, "Does His Highness know how many people died in this battle?" "I am sorry. I was really anxious. Last night, the palace suddenly came to report that Father's condition had suddenly worsened. Senior Du said that it might have happened in one night. I left in a hurry. The two uncles also did their best to stabilize Father's vitality. It was not until this morning that I found out that such a big thing had happened in the city. And Minister Chu had already completed a major operation." Tai Butian's tone had a touch of guilt. He also understood that if he could have cooperated with Chu Yang at the first moment, then the losses in the battle would have been reduced by at least half or even more. But in his worry and confusion, although Tai Butian knew that Chu Yang would have a major operation tonight, he still went to the palace first. Sigh. Chu Yang sighed. Tai Butian's attitude of admitting his mistake was very sincere. Chu Yang could not say anything. Besides, this matter could not be said to be Tai Butian's fault. His biological father was seriously ill. He could not possibly ignore it, right? Moreover, Tai Butian went to the palace before Chu Yang arranged the operation. This was even more difficult to blame. The number of casualties of the minister was calculated. Chen Yutong came in again. His expression was much more serious. "Yes, how is it?" Chu Yang asked. 3,370 soldiers have died in battle. The injured 113. Chen Yutong said. "This is the military's loss." As for Butian Pavilion, 77 people died in battle and 50 were injured. The guests of the imperial residence, 18 people died in battle and 35 were injured. The Ministry of Justice, a total of 100 people died in battle and 14 were injured. Butian Pavilion's hall leader Cheng is seriously injured. The minister is seriously injured. Chun Yutong finished and sighed softly. On the side, Tai Butian sucked in a breath of cold air. 8 people. A total of 8 enemies. 4 of them died under the arrows. And these casualties were basically killed by the hands of the other 4. And among the other 4, 3 of them were even more ferocious. Each of their subordinates took more than 1,000 lives from us. Chu Yang lightly said, "This is the power of experts." Tai Butian's face suddenly turned red. He also had the strength of experts on his side, but they were brought to the palace by him. If the 2 shadows participated in the battle, then these casualties could definitely be rewritten. Or even not at all. But they did not. Chu Yang did not say anything, but Tai Butian understood the meaning of Chu Yang's words. Your father is a father. Then how many fathers do these 4,000 people have? How many are fathers? Chapter 189. Chu Yang closed his eyes tiredly and said indifferently, Clan Master Chun, you can leave first. Qianqian, you too. The 2 of them looked at Chu Yang worriedly and finally walked out of the room, knowing that Chu Yang wanted to talk to Tai Butian alone. And this conversation would probably not be pleasant. Watching the 2 of them leave, Chu Yang was silent for a long time. I'm listening, Tai Butian said softly. I actually didn't want to say anything, but after thinking for a long time I still have to say it. Chu Yang's voice was a little sharp as he said, in your opinion, the emperor is critically ill, and as the Grand Empress, you should be by his side to serve him. In your opinion, the emperor's life and death also determine the fate of Iron Cloud, so the Grand Empress needs to be present. You need to use your greatest strength to treat the emperor's illness. This is very reasonable. As a woman, it is understandable for anyone to make such a decision. Chu Yang said quietly. But you must never forget that you are also a ruler. These reasons can be said very well in any other place, and can be understood by others. But they can't be said in the army. Chu Yang said heavily. Tai Butian suddenly looked up, wanting to say something, but Chu Yang didn't give him the chance to speak, quickly cutting him off. The army respects orders. Soldiers in the army, even if their parents are lying on the bed with only 1 breath left, as long as the army orders to gather, they will immediately set off and rush to the battlefield. If they are late by even a moment, their heads will roll. Military law is merciless. Military law doesn't give any reasons. Whether the father or mother is seriously ill, they can only obey orders. Chu Yang said indifferently, it was the same last night. With 1 order, nearly 4,000 people threw their lives away here. Your Highness, what can you compensate them for? Chu Yang asked sharply. What can compensate for the pain of a mother losing her son and a wife losing her husband? Because war is merciless, sacrifices are inevitable. For so many years millions of men have died on the battlefield, and no one said anything. This is a necessary sacrifice. Chu Yang said, however, when unnecessary sacrifices and completely avoidable sacrifices happen, no amount of regret or compensation will help. Tai Butian stood quietly, listening to Chu Yang's words. He knew that Chu Yang was a little emotional today, so he didn't say anything. Minister Chu, don't you think that your words are a bit harsh? A shadow guardian appeared and said coldly. I am not Tai Butian's subordinate. Chu Yang also said coldly, I'm just helping. What we, the Jados, are protecting is also the Tai clan's territory. If Tai Butian herself doesn't care, then we don't have to. He narrowed his eyes and coldly looked at Ying. If the advice is unpleasant to the ears, then your Highness can choose not to listen. You can also choose to banish me. Tai Butian heaved a long sigh. He waved his hand to stop the shadow from speaking further. He said, Minister Fei, you should recuperate well today. I am at fault for what happened today. In the future, I will come and beg for forgiveness from the minister. Then, he stood up and said, Minister Chu, take a good rest. When he reached the door, Chu Yang said coldly, the corpses of the soldiers who died in battle have yet to turn cold. The remnants of the Golden Horse Riders Department had yet to be executed. Your Highness, don't disappoint the soldiers. Tai Butian's body paused at the door. He wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't. He sighed and walked out. Chu Yang lay down heavily on the bed. He narrowed his eyes and thought about something. Chu Yang was a little impulsive today. He also wanted to control it, but the moment he saw Tai Butian, he suddenly decided not to control it. Tai Butian was a king. But this kind of mistake was not something a king could make. Of course he had a legitimate reason, but a legitimate reason did not necessarily mean that it was acceptable. If in the future, when the situation got worse and worse, Tai Butian still persisted in this filial piety that was praised by the whole world, it could lead to an unprecedented chaos in Iron Cloud. A catastrophe. Because Tai Shicheng did not have much longer to live. Whether Tai Butian was willing or not, he had to learn to accept from now on. Using such an extreme method to force a filial son to become a qualified king was cold-blooded. But Chu Yang had no other choice. Because if Tai Butian could not change this mindset, then Chu Yang would not see any hope of victory in this ancient war with Di Wuqing. Send someone to the palace. As long as Senior Du has time, ask him to come here immediately. Chu Yang ordered coldly. In addition, Qian, go to Heavenly Armament Pavilion immediately and ask Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang to come here. Chu Yang wanted to give a strong dose of medicine. And now he felt that this was the best opportunity. An hour later, Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang appeared in front of Chu Yang. How are your injuries? Gu Duxing asked with concern. I won't die yet. Chu Yang smiled. Then his expression became serious and he said, Duxing Wushang, there is one thing that I wanted to do after a while. But now it seems that it must be done immediately. You two can help me with this. What is it? Just say it. Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang were very straightforward. They were so bored that their bones ached. When GMO returned with his injuries, he bragged a lot. When everyone heard that he went with Chu Yang to do such a big thing, they were very envious. They wished that they could go out and fight as well. I need you two to help me kill a few people. Chu Yang's eyes flashed coldly as he slowly said. Perhaps now is the best opportunity to do so. Chu Yang had always been suspicious. Why did Iron Cloud Emperor Tai Shicheng's condition drag on? Why did it not get worse earlier or later? Why did it suddenly get worse at this critical moment? Why did it get worse to the point where two king-level masters needed to use all their strength to keep him alive? This was too much of a coincidence. If someone said that Du Shiqing had nothing to do with this, Chu Yang would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. And doing these things required time. In a hurry, Du Shiqing could not have done it so accurately. According to his calculations, it should have been some time after Kongshang Xian was injured. Then, Heimo retreated from Iron Cloud Citadel, and he began to search the entire citadel. It was during this time that Iron Cloud Citadel's Golden Horse Riders department realized that there was a big crisis. In order to divert Iron Cloud's attention, he used Tai Shicheng. At the very least, with Tai Shicheng in this situation, Tai Butian and his two king-level masters could be completely restrained. For the already injured Kongshang Xian and Yin Wu Fa, this was undoubtedly the loss of their two biggest muscles. It was because of this that Chu Yang was very dissatisfied with Tai Butian staying in the palace for so long. With Tai Butian's intelligence, he should not have fallen into the enemy's trap, but he did not even think about it and went to the palace. This made Chu Yang realize Tai Butian's biggest weakness. Even though Tai Butian was wise, decisive, and ruthless, there was one thing that made people uncomfortable. He was very emotional. Emotional. This kind of thing might be cute on a woman, but on a man, especially one who was the future emperor of a country, it was very uncomfortable to find this kind of thing on him. If he wanted to influence Du Shiqing, how? Du Shiqing himself would not do this kind of thing, and he would not contact Di Wuqing people. Chu Yang was very sure of this. Du Shiqing's hatred for Di Wuqing was definitely not fake. Then, was it the people around him? The person I want you to kill is... Chu Yang said seriously, do not expose yourself. Don't worry. This is too simple. Dong Wushang laughed and looked forward to it. Gu Duxing gently nodded. His eyes suddenly revealed a sharp murderous intent. Chang Yuan he stood in front of the window, feeling cold all over. Last night, after he finished arranging everything, he immediately left. But 2 hours later there was a large-scale battle. The sound of the fierce battle could be clearly heard from the inn a few miles away. But at that time he could not do anything. He could only try his best to control his subordinates' urge to go help and wait in silence. Kongshang Xian's cry of, "Don't let me die with regrets," shook the entire iron-cloud citadel from its slumber. At that moment, Chang Yuanhe clearly felt that Kongshang Xian was finished. Not long after, Yin Wu Fa's battered and bruised body suddenly came in. He twitched a few times, said a few words, and then fell into a deep coma. Go. Save my second brother. At that moment, Chang Yuanhe felt as if he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. He almost could not control himself. He immediately arranged for people to take Yin Wu Fa away and erase all traces. He knew that the pursuing army would arrive soon. Sure enough, after a short while, the search team arrived in waves. They even tore open the quilt and searched the whole place. When everything finally calmed down, it was already dawn. Yin Wu Fa's injuries were very serious. His life could be in danger at any moment. However, he had already used the Jade Spirit Ginseng once. Using it again would be useless. Chang Yuanhe could only give him Meng Hun's solution. Then, he immediately began to make arrangements to leave. Meng Hun's solution could only guarantee 1 month's time. If they could not return to Great Zhao within a month, Yin Wu Fa would die without a doubt. But right now, Iron Cloud Citadel was in a state of panic and unrest. All 4 gates were closed to search for spies. How could they leave? Because of this, Chang Yuanhe frowned every day. He asked many officials to leave the citadel by doing business, but all he received were apologetic replies. Chang Yuanhe thought for a long time, but he could not think of a safe way to leave. From that day on, he did not even dare to use the invisible falcon to send messages. Because there were people watching the sky day and night, the invisible falcon needed a short period of time to fly into the sky before it melted into the void. During that period of time, with the current strict surveillance, he was afraid that someone would find out. Once found out, it would be a disaster. Unable to contact him, Chang Yuanhe became even more anxious. If Prime Minister Diwu Qingro knew what had happened during this time, how would he react? Chapter 190. Of the 30 experts from Golden Horse Riders Department who came this time, 20 had already died. 3 command horse riders were all dead. Of the 2 king-level leaders, 1 died in battle. If the other one was not sent out, he was also in trouble. This was the biggest loss Golden Horse Riders Department had suffered in the past 10 years. It was the first time that a king-level expert had died outside the sect. Chang Yuanhe could only imagine how crazy Golden Horse Riders Department would be when they heard this news. Thinking about his own situation, Chang Yuanhe felt powerless to ask the heavens. He came to Iron Cloud Citadel with a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. But when he came here, he did not do anything and immediately fell into this awkward situation. From the first day he came here, Kongshang Xian acted without permission and dragged him into a quagmire. Now he was stuck in this quagmire and could not pull himself out. He frowned as he paced around and muttered, "Do I really have to take the risk?" In the afternoon, Du Shiqing arrived late. Right now, Iron Cloud Citadel was in a state of chaos. When Du Shiqing came, naturally all the bodyguards had to follow him. When Fire Saber Great Master Gao Weichang and the 4 knights arrived at the door of Butian Pavilion, they were stopped. They were politely led to the main hall for tea. Regarding this, Gao Weichang was indignant and said, "We have known Minister Chu for a long time. Why is it that after using us to climb to a high position in Iron Cloud, you suddenly turn against us? What a despicable person." Gao Weichang's words caused all of the Butian Pavilion members to angrily stare at him, especially those who had bandages on their shoulders. Their eyes were spitting fire, and they wanted to go up and chop this skinny old man with a mouthful of shit into meat paste. "Sir, I don't care who you are. If you say one more bad word about Minister Chu, I cannot guarantee that you will walk out of here alive," Chun Yutong said with a serious face. Gao Weicheng snorted. His face was full of disdain, but he did not say anything else. At this moment, Chu Yang and Du Shiqing were sitting across from each other in the room. "Senior Du, I want to know what kind of weakness Diwu Qingro has on you?" After a while, Chu Yang looked at Du Shiqing fixing his broken bones and slowly asked, "Blackmail?" Du Shiqing's hand trembled. "Yes, I am very curious. With Senior Du's character, how could you be threatened by Diwu Qingro?" Chu Yang said casually, "Especially last night. The monarch's illness was so coincidental. This made me feel even more uncomfortable. Du Shiqing looked up at the sky and sighed. After a long silence, he finally said, "My parents, wife and son are all in Golden Horse Riders Department. My parents are almost 80 years old. The most hateful thing is that my son, who is 23 years old this year, was brainwashed and joined Golden Horse Riders Department as a silver horse rider. And my daughter-in-law is actually a silver horse rider of the Golden Horse Riders Department. Once I make a move, my family will be annihilated." Du Shiqing sighed helplessly and said with a wry smile, "What can I do? Who would truly live for the sake of the world? After all, they are in the minority. Most people live for their parents. Others may not care, but I, Du Shiqing, cannot." Chu Yang was silent. He also sighed. Du Shiqing's matter was definitely a dead end. If it was just his family being held hostage, then this matter would be easy to solve. He could send a few experts and secretly bring them out. Although this matter would be difficult, it was not impossible. But the problem was that his son and daughter-in-law were loyal to Golden Horse Riders Department. This was the root of his stubbornness. Even if they were brought out, they would only be bringing out 2 spies. If Senior Du Shiqing did not betray but went missing, what would happen? Chu Yang probed. If that was the case, then perhaps they would be safe. Du Shiqing smiled bitterly. But how would they go missing? How could it be so easy to fool Di Wuqing Ro? It is not that there is no way. Chu Yang gently tapped the edge of the bed with his finger and said casually, "Fire Saber Great Master Gao Wei Cheng. What is his role in Golden Horse Riders Department?" Chu Yang's words were very certain. Du Shiqing smiled bitterly and said, "Sure enough, I can't fool you. Gao Wei Cheng is a dark horse rider. But this person likes to be alone. Although his martial arts are not outstanding, his ability to control firepower is not to be underestimated. Plus, Gao Wei Cheng seems to have come from a mysterious place. There is a huge force behind him. I only know this much." "Not necessarily. Mysterious place?" Chu Yang sneered and said, "Even if Gao Wei Cheng really came from that place, his identity is only a lowly person. How could someone from that place be so weak? Plus, once he came from that place, there would be many people working together. How could it be just him alone?" "You know that place?" Du Shiqing asked. "Yes." Chu Yang pondered and nodded. He asked, "Did Gao Wei Cheng inform you of Golden Horse Riders Department's operation?" "The other 4 guards." "I am not sure." Du Shiqing smiled bitterly and said, "I know what you want to do. But this matter needs to be handled carefully. What if the force behind Gao Wei Cheng is not something you can deal with right now? If we have to be careful in everything, then the best way is to do nothing." Chu Yang said softly, "Since we have already done it, even if the sky falls down, we have to go back up. It is not a big deal." Chu Yang said. Du Shiqing sighed deeply. Du Shiqing went back. On the way back, he sat in the carriage with a worried frown. Thinking about Chu Yang's words, he became even more worried. He was not worried for himself but for Chu Yang. If it worked, then there would be nothing to worry about. But the problem was, would his plan succeed? Would it implicate himself? Especially when Chu Yang said something that made Du Shiqing's hair stand on end. "Senior Du, with the monarch's condition, if you don't do anything, how many days can he last?" "This, I am not sure. If I let him go, I am afraid he will only have 10 days. 10 days? At that time, Chu Yang said thoughtfully, "Should be enough, right? What does Chu Yang want to do?" "Senior Du, this Chu Yang really thinks too highly of himself. This is simply intolerable." Gao Wei Cheng said angrily as he drove the carriage. At that time, when he was in such dire straits, he came to find Senior Du on the surface. He said it was to repay a favor, but in reality, he was using Senior Du's reputation to come to Iron Cloud to find a chance to rise up. At that time, he said righteously that he would never enter the bureaucracy. Now that I think about it, it is simply disgusting. Gao Wei Cheng's saliva flew everywhere. "Don't say any more." Du Shiqing closed his eyes slightly and said lightly, "This bastard, sooner or later he will..." What sooner or later Gao Wei Cheng did not say. He drove the carriage without saying anything else. The imperial city was already close at hand. The road to the sky was wide and flat. There were patrolling soldiers all around. Logically speaking, this was the safest place. Mr. Du, please come with me to see a patient. Thank you. A faint voice said faintly. His voice was clear and elegant and very courteous. Who is it? Gao Weicheng stretched his neck and asked. In the past few days, as long as he occasionally came out, there were too many people who stopped Du Shiqing to see a patient. Over time, Gao Weicheng had already gotten used to it. It is me. The faint voice said lightly. Senior Du has not spoken yet. What are you, a coachman, shouting for? Gao Weicheng was furious and said, when you ask someone to see a patient, you must be polite. What kind of attitude is this? As he said this, he stood up from the carriage and looked around. His face was full of anger. The voice replied, courteous? I have not learned it yet. But for disobedient people, I have already learned how to kill. Before he finished speaking, a jet-black saber light appeared in broad daylight and turned into a lightning bolt that struck Gao Weicheng. After the saber light flashed, a faint shadow suddenly appeared. Another shadow with a shining sword came out from under the carriage. With a swoosh, the 4 guards' throats were cut, and they were thrown in 4 different directions. Then this person entered the carriage and said faintly, Senior Du, saving a patient is like putting out a fire. Come with me. With a boom, the roof of the carriage was pierced through. A masked man in black with one hand carrying Du Shiqing flew out of the hole and landed on the roof of the carriage. Then with a kick of his feet, he flew out like a big bird. Using the roof of a house on the side of the road as leverage, he disappeared without a trace with a whoosh. At this time, Gao Weicheng was already out of breath from the saber that was as dark as night. If he did not crazily throw out fire, his head would have already fallen to the ground at this moment. Seeing that Du Shiqing was taken away, Gao Weicheng turned pale with fright. He wanted to rush forward to stop them, but the saber technique of the masked man in black was very flexible. His body did not land on the ground, but Gao Weicheng was already in a difficult situation. He could not free his hands and could only watch as Du Shiqing was taken away. Someone come quickly. Senior Du has been taken away. Gao Weicheng was in a hurry and did not care about face. He screamed at the top of his lungs. This is a saber great master? The masked man in black coldly sneered. You have really lost the face of a saber great master. It was clear that this masked man in black was also a saber great master. Gao Weicheng's scream spread far and wide. Immediately, the surrounding troops began to gather. I originally wanted to play with you, but I did not expect that you would not even care about face. You might as well not even care about your life. The masked man in black suddenly shouted and pulled back his saber. In an instant, it was as if all the air in the area was sucked out by his saber and turned into a vacuum. Then the saber, as dark as night, came down with a swoosh. This saber did not have any fancy moves, but it was very imposing. It made people feel that even if there was a mountain in front of them, this saber would still be able to split it. Moreover, this saber did not hold back. It seemed that no matter what was in front of it, after splitting it, it would not stop. It would continue to slash downwards and split the earth in two. Gao Weicheng only felt that the opponent's saber was firmly locked onto him. For a moment, it was difficult for him to even use his saber. He could not help but be scared out of his wits. Suddenly he screamed. The saber in his hand and the 7 orifices on his face suddenly spewed out fire. Chapter 191. So this is the fire saber great master. The man in black snorted coldly. His saber's aura changed 4 times. With a schwa sound, the oncoming fire was split in half by this saber. Then his saber slashed the ground with a schwa sound. Using the rebound from the saber, the man in black somersaulted into the air. At this time, the first wave of arrows came down like a waterfall. The man in black did not make a sound. His saber was in the air. With a schwa sound, his body changed direction and avoided the arrows. He landed on top of the wall and disappeared without looking back. Gao Weicheng still maintained his saber-slashing posture. His 2 eyes stared fiercely in front of him. His 7 orifices were still spewing out fire. Then the fire suddenly disappeared without any warning. Gao Weicheng's eyes slowly became unfocused. He turned a deaf ear to the people who rushed over and asked him questions. He did not respond at all. Immediately after, a thin line of blood slowly appeared on his forehead. The line of blood slowly spread out, and then with a swoosh it spurted out. Gao Weicheng's standing body suddenly split into two halves, like a watermelon that was cut from the middle, and fell to the ground with a plop. His entire body maintained perfect balance. From head to crotch it was split into two halves. The two halves of his body neatly formed the word one on the ground. His internal organs spilled all over the ground. There were screams all around. Many soldiers were so scared that their weapons fell to the ground. Then one by one they turned around and vomited. Du Shiqing's bodyguards were all dead. Fire Saber Great Master Gao Weicheng died in battle. Divine Doctor Du Shiqing disappeared. Moreover, the most ironic thing was that this happened right in front of Iron Cloud Citadel's royal palace. In fact, it was not even 100 feet away. This kind of thing was like pouring oil on the already boiling Iron Cloud Citadel. It completely blew up. Tai Butian lost his usual calmness and became furious. He ordered a search of the entire citadel. King of Hell Chu lost his usual gloominess and became furious. He ordered, even if we have to turn over all the rat holes in Iron Cloud Citadel, we must find Divine Dr. Du. All the officials in Iron Cloud Citadel were furious. They spontaneously organized their guards to participate in the search. Tai Longcheng, who was still on the front lines, was furious. He ordered the military to search with all their might. In just a moment, Iron Cloud Citadel began to shake as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. Iron Cloud Citadel is now in a state of chaos that cannot be described in words. You're right. You've just killed a king-level master. Iron Cloud Citadel is now in a state of chaos. The craziest of them all was King of Hell Chu, Minister Chu. Under the mobilization of Butian Pavilion, King of Hell Chu's eyes behind his mask became blood red. He glared fiercely at his 200 subordinates and said through gritted teeth, Senior Du Shiqing is a godly doctor of his generation, and I owe him a great favor. This time I don't care who took Mr. Dean. In short, I must make him pay. Unbearable price. I want to let these daring thieves know that there are some things that they can't do. There are some people you can't afford to offend. Now, the biggest suspect is the remaining members of the Golden Horse Riders Department in the city. These bastards must have been driven to desperation and committed such atrocious acts. Now I give the order. Chang'an. Minister Chu's roar shook the entire Butian Pavilion. Dust began to fall from the roofs. Subordinate is here. Hall leader Chang, who had not recovered from his serious injuries, stepped forward. My order. King of Hell Chu's crazy eyes flickered with a hysterical rage and an unconcealable murderous intention. Everyone who saw him shuddered in fear. Fierce Blood Hall must stop the new murderers. Everyone must be mobilized at once. If you can't find Mr. Dean, Chang'an, think about the consequences. Yes. Chang'an's thin face was dripping with sweat the size of soybeans. Chen Yutong. Minister Chu roared again, and the entire hall shook 3 times. Subordinate is here. Chen Yutong trembled as he came out. My order. Heavenly Secrets Hall, stop the new training. Everyone move out. All the intelligence networks move out. All the connections, use them all. All of them. That, all of them. That. And that. King of Hell Chu excitedly slapped the table. Do you understand? Chen Yutong fainted. The first hall master really wanted to ask, Minister, what is that? What is that? L. Ref equals in quo. RG equals in quo. Undersurveilling K equals in quo. NG. However, hall leader Chun didn't have the guts to do so. So he stood up straight and said in an imposing manner, Minister, this subordinate completely understands. Good. If you can't do it, you should think about the consequences. Minister Chu pointed with his right hand. Move out immediately. Yes. Chen Yutong's face was firm. He walked out the door with firm steps. He thought to himself, wait until Minister Chu's anger subsides. I have to go in again and ask what that is. Otherwise, I have already said it clearly. If I can't finish playing, then I will really pass down my order. King of Hell Chu's thunderous roar came from the main hall. Capital Imperial Guards, 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 Capital Justice 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 Imperial Guards. Even if these bastards turn into bedbugs, dig them out and chop them into pieces. This murderous aura. This aura. This Chun Yutong wiped the sweat off his face and quickly walked out. I should hide first. Tai Butian was rushing to Butian Pavilion. Tai Butian's intuition told her that this matter had something to do with King of Hell Chu. But she could not describe what she was feeling. Just as she arrived at Butian Pavilion, she saw a group of people wiping their sweat in fear. They walked out one by one, their faces pale and sweating. What's wrong? Grand Elder asked. Before he finished speaking, a crashing sound was heard from inside. With a sudden sound, a broken table flew out and fell into the courtyard, breaking into pieces. Immediately a furious roar was heard. Bastard! Bastard! This is the biggest joke in the world. The divine doctor was robbed in front of the imperial city. What are all of you doing? The country's salary is feeding you, fat motherfucker. You just take the money and don't do anything. This iron cloud must be cleaned up. It must be seriously reorganized. Everyone jumped in fright. Clean up? You've almost killed them all. This Butian Pavilion. It must be cleaned up. I don't want any of these vermin. Crush them to death. Minister Chu's angry voice came out from inside, accompanied by the crashing sound of things being smashed. Everyone shuddered as Feng Xian ran out of the room in fear. Cleaning up the bureaucracy, if it was not serious, it would only result in imprisonment. But cleaning up Butian Pavilion, it was a dead end. Hurry up and get to work. What the hell? Fuck. King of Hell Chu was still cursing. Tai Butian listened with a calm face for a while, and finally walked in. Your Excellency the Minister, please calm down for the time being. Nonsense. How can I calm down after this? Do you know how embarrassing this is? Grand Elder? Minister Chu yelled halfway before he realized that the person he was yelling at was the Grand Elder. For a moment he could not help but feel awkward. Tai Butian stood quietly and looked at Chu Yang. After a long time, he slowly said, Minister, what do you think about the disappearance of Divine Dr. Du? I am very angry, Chu Yang said. For something like this to happen in the most important place in Iron Cloud Citadel, it is simply shocking. Chu Yang's tone was heavy. Well, if Senior Du is not found, I am afraid there is no hope for my father's illness. Tai Butian's voice was trying hard to control his emotions, but the sadness and helplessness were clear. Chu Yang sighed and lowered his head. Then he raised it up and looked at Tai Butian. I am very angry that Senior Du is missing. But when it comes to the Emperor's illness, please forgive me. I have a different view. Tai Butian was silent. He also looked at Chu Yang's eyes without blinking and said, Oh, these days Du Xianyo came here. I also talked to him about the Emperor's illness. Chu Yang sighed and said, Senior Du once said that the Emperor's current illness has reached the point where he is like a lamp that has run out of oil. Every time he took a breath, he would suffer great torment. Mr. Du's treatment of the Emperor is not a treatment at all, but a stimulation of the Emperor's pain as much as possible, using this pain to maintain the Emperor's breath and consciousness. Chu Yang said indifferently, Senior Du once said that when the Emperor was conscious, he begged Senior Du countless times to stop treating him and to let him die quickly. At this point, continuing to live is tantamount to the greatest torture in the world. At this time, if you forcefully keep him alive out of filial piety, it is no longer filial piety, it is making him beg for death. Don't say any more. Tai Butian suddenly shut her eyes tightly and let out a shrill roar. His chest rose and fell rapidly. After a long time, 2 clear tears flowed from his eyes, slid down his cheeks and dripped to the ground. He did not wipe them away. How can I not know what you are saying? Every time I see my father struggling in pain, how can I feel good in my heart? Tai Butian murmured, Don't I know that my father is living a life worse than death? Don't I know that he yearns to end his life immediately? My father was originally a hero of the world, but now he doesn't even have the strength to end his life with his own hands. How sad is this for a hero? Tai Butian wiped his tears fiercely and suddenly said in a low voice, But have you ever thought about me? Chapter 192. You're not me. You don't know how I feel. Tai Butian gritted her teeth. Although it was painful, as long as there was a breath, there was hope. Although the hope was slim and even laughable, there was still hope. I feel that every day is still full of hope. 17,000 years ago, when we were still eating raw meat and drinking blood, the first emperor of the First Empire, the emperor of the Oracle Empire, was on the verge of death. All the miracle doctors said that there was no way to save him, but at the last moment a strange man came. With a heavy pill, the emperor recovered immediately. The emperor's injuries were much more serious than my father's. Tai Butian reached out and grabbed Chu Yang's collar. She hissed, "He was the emperor, my father was also the emperor. But why didn't anyone send a heavy pill to my father? Why? Heavy pill." Chu Yang felt like his heart was hit hard by a big hammer. That's right. It's the heavy pill. The truth of this matter has always been buried. No one has dared to speak out. Only the ancient records of the royal family have recorded bits and pieces of it. But it's precisely because of the royal records that there are no mistakes. Tai Butian roared angrily. Why didn't it happen when it came to my father? Chu Yang was speechless. He didn't know that there was such a thing. A heavy pill had actually appeared 17,000 years ago. That was to say, there was once a tribulation sword master 17,000 years ago. Only the tribulation sword master could produce the heavy pill. Everyone knows that my father is better off dead than alive. But even if we don't talk about family ties, if we talk about the political situation, if I let my father die, am I still human? Who will fight for Iron Cloud? Because Iron Cloud has such a heartless emperor. Who will be willing to fight for him? What conscience does a person who doesn't even care about his own father have? What right does he have to make others risk their lives for him? I don't want to think about this. It's too cruel. But I can't not think about it. Do you think that I, Tai Butian, want to be the emperor? Do you think that I really care about the throne? Do you think I really don't care about the world and the lives of the soldiers? Tai Butian glared at Chu Yang furiously. You were born in the wilderness. How much do you know about such politics? You only know what you should and shouldn't. But do you know that there is a clear line between what should and shouldn't? Tai Butian roared. Everything that seems to be a golden rule to all of you is a grave mistake when it's me who's doing it. As the emperor, millions of people are watching me. What do I have to do? I also want to ignore everything and just go to sleep, but I can't. I also want to work when the sun rises and rest when the sun sets. You know, that kind of civilian life is my dream. But I will never be able to get it. Even if Iron Cloud Nation is destroyed, I will not have it. Do you understand? Tai Butian said heavily, I'm very tired. I'm tired to death every day. But when I think about it, my imperial father is lying there. My imperial father is still there. He is still looking at me, looking at his son working hard for Iron Cloud Nation. I don't feel tired. Do you understand this feeling? Father Emperor's birth. Well, from a small point of view, I lost my father. But from a large point of view, it concerns the life and death of millions of people within 13 million li of Iron Cloud. Tai Butian's voice slowly lowered. And now, the disappearance of Divine Dr. Du has caused my imperial father to lose all hope. I also don't want Divine Dr. Du to go missing. And I also don't want anything to happen to the emperor. Chu Yang slowly poured himself a cup of wine and said, but there is one thing that as the emperor, as the actual emperor, even if it is cruel, you have to see clearly. This matter, for Iron Cloud, is beneficial and not harmful. That's right. Tai Butian's voice was very cold. For a long time I, the Emperor of Iron Cloud, have exercised my authority as the Emperor, but it has always been wrong. One country having two emperors is also a big taboo. With my imperial father gone, for Iron Cloud's imperial court, whether it's the military or the government, whether it's those who originally opposed me or those who agreed with me, they have to take a step further. For Iron Cloud, this is indeed beneficial and not harmful. Especially in such an intricate and complicated situation where the country could be destroyed at any moment. Such a situation is indeed a good thing. Tai Butian smiled coldly. But who would have thought that this is how I feel? Have you thought about it? Tai Butian went straight to the point. Have you thought about it? Chu Yang was dejected and speechless. I'm not the kind of ambitious and ruthless person who has too much power, Tai Butian said quietly. He turned around, his thin shoulders trembling. At this moment this Emperor Butian, who had always been wise and calm, actually looked so pitiful. I'm going to the palace. During this time, I'll have to trouble Minister Chu. Tai Butian took a deep breath and said, whether it's the compensation for the soldiers who died in battle, the search for spies, or the search for divine Dr. Du's whereabouts, I believe Minister Chu will do a good job. Tai Butian turned around and said softly, my father only has a few days left. No matter what, I will take care of him. Even if the country is destroyed because of this, I will not hesitate. After he finished speaking, he quickly walked out. When he reached the door, he stopped and said softly, Chu Yang, if Du Shiqing is not found, I will hate you. I will hate you for a lifetime. Tai Butian was not stupid. Du Shiqing walked out of Chu Yang's place and then disappeared. How could he not be suspicious? But he said, I hate you and not I will kill you. This was somewhat thought-provoking. After he finished speaking, Tai Butian's figure disappeared from the door. Chu Yang stood at the door in a daze looking outside. If someone could see his face behind the mask, they would be able to see that there was a fierce struggle on his face. Right now, Tai Shicheng's life was worse than death. Dying a bit earlier was a kind of relief for him. Moreover, it was a kind of favor. Everyone knew this. Forcefully dragging him out to prevent his death was too cruel for this once mighty monarch. This was also something everyone knew. Letting Tai Shicheng die at noon was not a sad thing for the entire country of Iron Cloud, but a kind of relief. Plus, Iron Cloud's political power would become more stable, and Tai Butian's position would finally be legitimate. For the war between the two countries, there was no more hidden worry. This was a great thing. Plus, Chu Yang choosing to let Du Shiqing disappear at this time was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. First, Du Shiqing was safe. Second, Iron Cloud Citadel was in chaos. There were still remnants of Golden Horse Riders Department left. This way they could increase their search efforts. Most importantly, at this time, Golden Horse Riders Department's strength was greatly reduced. Of the 2 king-level leaders, one was dead, and the other was seriously injured. The 3 command horse riders were all dead. Golden Horse Riders Department's power in Iron Cloud was weakened to the lowest point in history. Plus, it had not been long since Tang Xianshang and the other spies were caught. Golden Horse Riders Department did not have enough time to reorganize. Tai Shicheng's death at this time was definitely outside of Diwu Qingrou's expectations. In Chu Yang's opinion, Diwu Qingrou might not even have enough time to react. This was because the people of Golden Horse Riders Department in Iron Cloud Citadel would not dare to contact Great Zhao. Like this, Diwu Qingrou's eyes were closed. As long as he did not know, or if he knew too late, then he would be able to smoothly pass through the chaos caused by Tai Shicheng's death in his previous life. This would quietly eliminate the greatest crisis of Iron Cloud, second only to Tai Butian's death. This was a good thing for Tai Shicheng, for Iron Cloud Citadel, and for millions of people. So many good things, so many benefits, but Chu Yang did not think about Tai Butian. He did not think about this problem from Tai Butian's point of view, or maybe he thought about it but ignored it. But now, Tai Butian's reaction made Chu Yang feel guilty. It made him start to think about what was right and wrong. His decision was not wrong, but he needed to reflect on his motives. No matter what, this caused a certain amount of harm to Tai Butian. Regardless of whether his motives were benevolent or selfish, at least if he said he felt guilty, then he would be letting Tai Butian down. Thinking about this, Chu Yang suddenly had a feeling. I want to change fate and change the world. Am I thinking too much from a selfish point of view? Thinking about this, Chu Yang became alert. He did not regret today's decision, but he set a rule for himself. In the future, when making a decision, he would think about it as much as possible. This was because he was afraid that he would regret it in the future. Or, at a certain time when he thought about something, his conscience would feel uneasy. Chu Yang knew very well that this kind of mental torture was the greatest torture in the world. That kind of guilt was enough to torment a person to the brink of death. Chu Yang did not want to owe this kind of guilt for the rest of his life. In the afternoon, after searching for Yin Wu Fa and the others, there was no news. Chu Yang was about to go back to Heavenly Armament Pavilion when a shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. The Emperor wants to see you. The Emperor wants to see me? Chu Yang was stunned. That Emperor? It's the current Emperor. The shadow explained stiffly, let's go. Chu Yang did not have time to reply before the shadow suddenly grabbed him. Then Chu Yang felt himself floating out the door. Then he floated out the door and floated. To the imperial palace. Chu Yang was speechless. Even if you want to take me away, you should at least tell me first, right? Especially when you take me away and you don't show yourself. Everyone on the street will see me floating like a ghost. This kind of feeling was really depressing. The energy in your body is very strange. When the shadow put him down, he actually said something very strange. He frowned and shook his head. I have never seen it before. Then, without waiting for Chu Yang to reply, he disappeared. Chu Yang looked around and saw that he was already in the imperial palace. Outside a big hall, the air was filled with a strong smell of medicine. Through the tassels, he could vaguely see that Tai Butian was standing very carefully inside. He seemed to be bending over and saying something, but his voice was very low. After a while, Tai Butian turned his head and looked outside the door. He whispered, "Is Minister Chu outside?" Chu Yang said, "It is Chu Yang. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."